I love what I do, and I'm the best motherfucker in the world doing it today.
Glass.
Into the glass!
Light bulbs. Barbed wire.
A man like Nick Gage, and there he is.
These are not things that are meant for the human body.
Beyond the fantasy world of larger-than-life heroes and villains lies the brutal and unforgiving underworld of deathmatch wrestling. And its undisputed king, Nick Gage.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna light these bitches up.
This isn't a children's TV show on Saturday morning. When that bell rings, it's real to Nick Gage. This is gonna be a fight.
For the uninitiated, stepping into Gage's domain is an invitation to an arena of pain where blood will be spilled.
Oh my God! He just snuffed David Arquette!
He's starting to bug out a little bit, and that's how you got cut in the throat.
I told you not to cut me. I'm an actor, so I was in over my head.
But for Gage, his most intense battle was fought outside the ring as the harsh consequences of his lifestyle bled out into real life.
He's cut! That!
Leaving him at rock bottom.
Painkillers, Percocet, Oxycontin, all those things.
What do you mean Nicky robs a bank?
Why would you do something like that? You're killing yourself.
Cut that camera. Cut the camera.
Gage is in the house. Gage is gonna do what he wants. And anytime you want to fight me, you can.
Deathmatch Wrestling is a live-action horror movie. Raised on the blood-soaked matches of their heroes, its participants strive to outdo icons of the past by escalating their brutality to new life-threatening heights. All to satisfy a bloodthirsty crowd.
You gotta love this shit, man. Because guess what? That shit hurts. And that shit burns. That shit might say, why the f am I doing this shit right now? Because it ain't the payday. My name is Nick Gage. I'm the greatest deathmatch wrestler in the world. I'm a leader of a gang called Murder, Death, Kill Gang. I represent Eastern Bloc Hate Club. So that's who I am, man.
So for you personally, why deathmatch wrestling?
I'm probably a little crazy in the head. My pain tolerance is high. I also want to show other wrestlers that this style of wrestling's all right, man. And it can be done, and there is a fan base, and it's awesome.
Some deathmatch wrestlers are some of the best storytellers, the best in the world at connecting with an audience. Nick Gage being one of them. My name is John Moxley, and I am a professional wrestler.
John Moxley is no stranger to ultraviolence. Before reaching world championship status in the mainstream, Moxley cut his teeth on the indie deathmatch scene where he routinely crossed paths with Nick Gage.
Who he is in the ring when he walks out and that music hits and he comes out like, yeah, Nick Gage, high-fiving, getting all pumped up, yeah, getting all excited. That's how he is all the time. First one-on-one encounter, he pulls out a pizza cutter.
And now he's got a pizza cutter.
I'm thinking, give me a nice working, I'll do a little poke and twist. It's all an illusion. Not so much.
Look at this.
He gives me a pizza cutter. The crowd goes, oh yeah, kill him, cut his head off. So he gets excited.
Nick Gage will do whatever it takes to be CCW World Champion once again.
I don't want to just tackle you and start having a real fight here. I'm trying to keep this match on track. We got a good story. The crowd's into this. Please don't pizza cut the out of my face so much.
And this crowd is eating it up.
And now he's excited, and I just feel the excited energy, and I'm like, oh God, no. And then he takes the pizza cutter and puts it in my mouth and slices it across my mouth.
Nick Gage is getting carried away. Wins over by the waist.
And I'm like, that mother cut my tongue out.
Yeah, look at Moxley's face already.
Your tongue still attached? Okay, and we continue to match, and the intensity is off the charts.
Rabel. Oh, what a headbutt right to the sternum.
Once you go out there and you get into it, you feel that Nick Gage intensity. The 30 people in the crowd are going, ah, and you're just like, ah, but it's like, this is what you live for. I don't give a shit how much money I make. I don't give a shit how much of a star I am. I don't give a about any of that. I do this for that feeling. I love the feeling of being in a locker room with half of my blood gone, smoking a cigarette, drinking a beer. And that is the feeling that is so addictive that what keeps you coming back. I think that's probably what keeps Nick Gage coming back too.
Oh yeah, and what a finals it's gonna be with Nick Gage.
For nearly a decade, Gage built a reputation on a fearless appetite for violence, but he would be put to the ultimate test on the most ruthlessly unforgiving stage, the Tournament of Death. Every year, fans descend on backyard farmlands to witness a multi-round endurance test of violence, where wrestlers must survive several gruesome matches over the course of a single day.
Tournament of Death takes place in Delaware, out in this field, kind of like Woodstock for deathmatch wrestling. Fans out there parking their vans, getting drunk, smoking weed. You know, we need a place where we can have blood and glass and fire and cops aren't gonna break up the party. It's quite the scene.
In the finals of the tournament, Gage is to face Thumbtack Jack in a fight that would redefine the meaning of deathmatch wrestling. Nothing could prepare the crowd for the real-life horror show that was about to unfold.
Okay, this is insane. I was right there for this. My name is Brett Lauderdale. I'm the owner and promoter of Game Changer Wrestling. Definitely been through it all with him, good and bad. You know, very good and very bad. At this time in 2009, I was full-time referee for CZW. You know, I was in the ring. This was a really significant match because Nick Gage was peaking in popularity at this time. He was as popular as he had ever been in his career. And Thumbtack Jack, I mean, he was an import from Germany. You know, he was an international deathmatch star. So it was really a clash at that time of like the two most popular deathmatch wrestlers.
They imported some douchebag from Germany.
They're talking all this shit about Thumbtack Jack. He's tough as hell and all that shit. And I'm thinking, man, this is my house. It's my backyard, and I'm gonna smash this motherfucker.
You know what? He looks like a pussy, man.
200 light tube death match. Entire ring surrounded by vertical light tubes stuck in between the ropes. Complete pit of glass.
I remember him getting whipped into the ropes, which were, of course, surrounded by tubes. I remember that. And at first, it didn't look anything like out of the ordinary.
Thumbtack Jack.
But one of the video guys, they all reacted immediately.
What happened was the light tube, when I hit it, the top of it snapped. So the bottom of it's sticking there. And I just hit it the wrong way, and then bang, got me.
Looks down, lifts his arm, and just...
This is buckets of blood. I'm like, oh, I'm up. I know my body. Sliced my arteries.
He's cut. Bad.
But we've got Nick Gage has been seriously injured. Thumbtack Jack frustrated at this turn of events.
John!
A guy like Nick Gage to just get up and walk off like that, you know it had to be serious.
The nurse lady, he wanted her to tape him up so he could go back to the ring.
Tape that shit up. I'm not losing to this dude.
Get that shit up, y'all.
Lay down first.
Where does put a bunch of towels in there and tape it up?
No!
I got one move, man.
No.
This is your last move here.
Well, can I act like I'm trying to go out there and you guys bring me back out?
No.
For Nick, it's not registering, you know? Like, I'm gonna prove how tough I am by going back out to the ring and finishing this match, even if it means I have to die out there.
Let me go out there.
No. Nicky, no.
Get the shit on camera. I want to go out there, smart Mark.
I know. I
Put the shit on camera.
Nick, I understand.
I was in the back, you know, of course, get bandaged up and shit like that.
Cut that camera. Cut the camera.
And they're like, well, they're trying to get the ambulance on the property, but the ambulance can't get on the property, so we need a helicopter. Here comes the helicopter landing down. And I get in the helicopter, and that's the last thing I remember. The nurse that said you flatlined where you were in there, and the doctors brought you back because you lost too much blood.
Nicky died and was legally dead for 7 minutes. He died at tournament of death. It's supposed to be a turn of phrase. You're not actually supposed to die. And he did. It just cements and solidifies Nick Gage's spot as a folk hero.
It was probably a boost to his whole character and his allure that you can't kill him. He says to this day, like, that he's willing and ready to die in the ring if that's what it comes to. And I mean, can you doubt him after that?
Was there any part of you that thought that this could be it for you?
No, no way. No, I don't go out like that, man. I'm gonna do this till I can't do it no more. I already made my mind up. I've been wanting to do this since I was probably 9 years old, man. Grew up in National Park, New Jersey, born and raised. Represent that shit till to this day. National Park, New Jersey is a low income, probably middle class, you know, in the 80s and stuff like that. I was raised by a single mother, Patty Dukes, Pat Wilson, man, I love her. This is my mom, man, Patty Dukes, Mom Dukes. The whole town called her Patty or Mom Dukes. Beautiful lady. And I just wanted to show everybody that I was raised the right way, you know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, his mom was everything to him. You know, everything, everything. My name is Sandra Culbertson, and we went to the same high school. Been with him for 20 plus years now. His mom would literally brighten up our day. It could be the worst day possible. She'll just come walking in the back. Hey guys, I got your food, let's eat. And she was just a very, very happy person. Very happy, and loved Nick to death.
My mom had breast cancer, so we did the walk every year for the breast cancer walk in Philadelphia, man. Because I just love her, and I just wanted to, you know, it's your mom, man. You appreciate her. I had a brother, Chris. We just go around, you know, being crazy, play football, play baseball. We were always the guys who, like, get in the fight in the football. Oh, there goes the Wilson brothers again. They're fist fighting. My dad was a big wrestling fan, so, you know, that's where it comes from. We would spend, like, weekends at his house, and he's watching the Saturday Night Main Event. We don't have to turn it on. Dad's got it on already, you know what I mean? Sometimes I think he regrets that shit, you know, when he was alive, because, man, we tore his house up. Yeah. We had a backyard company called Hardcore Backyard Wrestling. We would videotape our matches and shit like that. One time we took barbed wire from a farm that we bought, and we wrapped barbed wire around the poles, and we had a no-rope barbed wire match on the trampoline.
And so what's influencing you guys to, like, use barbed wire in that way?
Probably Japanese death matches we started figuring out. Once I seen Terry Funk and Cactus Jack doing their thing, the blood, the violence, the way they told the story.
We separate the men from the old bastards.
It was on, man. I'm like, we gotta do this. This is what I want to do, man. This is awesome. Then we started getting into ECW.
For the love of God!
ECW is the reason why I love doing this shit today.
Out of that came CZW.
And somersault senton!
And Now we're taking it to a whole nother level of craziness that's never been seen in the United States before.
Every single CZW tournament of death.
Driven by their passion for the hardcore style of ECW, the Wilson brothers brought their backyard wrestling roots into upstart promotion Combat Zone Wrestling as Nick Gage and Justice Payne.
ECW was so offended by it. Oh, these guys might get hurt. Light tubes are too dangerous? The f out of here. They're just mad a new generation came along who's tougher and crazier than they are. I love it.
It's a very dangerous situation in there.
When he's in the ring, I'm literally right there. I'm always in the front. I'm like, yeah, get him, kill him. I'm right there in the front. I'm just one of the fans.
Oh man, it's gotta be at least 100,000 of them.
When he told me he was gonna get lit on fire, I told him not to do it. I think he just told me he wasn't gonna do it so that I wouldn't be like freaking out. And so when it happened and I saw the fire coming out, I'm like, oh no, here we go. I saw him get lit on fire, and I think someone told him like, stop, drop, and roll.
So I stopped, drop, and roll. Get this, that shit don't even work. I was still on fire, and then they put me out.
And then finally he took off his shirt, and it finally went out. After that, I went into the back. I never do that. It's one thing I don't do. I do not run into the back. I'll wait to the end of the show. But this is one thing I did go in the back.
Nick, you okay?
He's getting ice. He's got ice pack.
He said he was okay, but I knew he wasn't.
God, it burns. Is it like bubbling and shit?
Skin. It's like peeled skin.
That heat was tough. I finished that match.
Stop! Damn! Someone call 911!
How do you think he was dealing with all of the pain and injury?
Well, he was definitely not going to physical therapy or exploring yoga opportunities.
I was popping heavy, prescription pills, man. I was popping perks and shit like that. I'm Nick Gage, so I go into a doctor's office. Oh, give me 30 Roxy sets. Then they would give them to you. It's crazy. And I never been a druggy guy ever. And then when you don't have them, you're like, whoa, what the is that?
At some point, OxyContin got hard to get because it's very expensive. He can walk down the street and get heroin for $10 a bag and get all the same effects and get more of it.
How much of his income would you say would go to drugs?
All of it. Definitely all of it. I looked at him like a guy who was in trouble and he had no choice, and now he's in this really bad situation. It is what it is. I mean, he was an addict. That was basically his life.
And here we go, fans. Our main event tonight.
As Nick Gage descends deeper into addiction, his career and his relationship with his brother Chris begins to deteriorate. Face to face in the ring, Chris's anger and frustration is about to erupt.
Let's just put it this way, man. I went out there and I wasn't on top of my game, and I just didn't remember how to do stuff, okay? I guess my brother was a little upset in the ring, so he said, wake the up, and literally slapped me like a bitch.
Current champion, Justice Payne.
So I'm like, damn, man, what the
The southpaw. Justice Payne, that hard left to the head of his brother.
The match started, and a few minutes later, Chris just grabbed him and put him in his finisher, the Pain Thriller.
His Pain Thriller! Oh! You gotta be kidding me! What?
Pretty much dislocated, almost broke my shoulder. I was very, very upset about that.
That was very weird. It was like at the beginning of the match, like, aren't you gonna have a match before you start working towards the finishing sequence?
After falling out with his brother, it seems Nick has reached rock bottom. But things get even worse when his mother loses her battle with breast cancer.
And how did that affect you?
Not good, you know? Now that my mom died, I didn't give a man. I didn't really care. And then I was starting to get into that shit, you know? Bad combination, bro, you know?
Over the next few years, Nick spirals further into desperation and finds himself on the verge of homelessness.
So at this time, I pretty much didn't have no friends or family no more, you know? My mom passed away, my dad passed away. I didn't talk to my brother. I didn't talk to nobody, man. So I'm in the hood, and I move in with the girl's mom, and I'm doing nothing, man. I'm sitting on the couch doing nothing, man. And then one day, she freaked out and kicked us both out in the cold air.
At that point in time, we weren't really into going to work, having money, and paying bills and stuff like that. We didn't care. We did not care at that point. We did not care.
I was going out of town, and for some reason, my trip got cut short. You know, I walked up to my door, and my door was like unhinged, open, and I was like, you know, is there somebody here? I saw two people sleeping on the floor, and I was like, oh my God, that's Nick and his girlfriend. And I mean, I was pissed.
Him, man. Kicked me out of his house. It was 10 degrees out. So now I'm angry and upset, and I need money, and I got nowhere to go. So that leads to, you know, the day of. I needed money, man, and I'm freezing, and everybody's kicking me out, so let me go get mine. So I'm walking down the street, and I see this bank, and I look around, and I'm like, and I left. I pussied out. So I'm walking down the street like, mother, man, you pussy, man. So I showed up at the next bank, and I went right in that bitch, man. I wrote the note, handed it to her. I have a gun. Give me all your money. Hurry the f*** up. You know, I had to lose my temper a little, you know, just taking too long. She handed me the money, and I ran all the way to my boy's house, man.
My front door opened. He just walked into my kitchen and dropped a bunch of money on my kitchen counter. And I was like, you know, what is that? He said to me, I just robbed a drug dealer. And then I looked at the money, and we're talking brand new, crisp $20 bills. And I said, did you just rob a bank?
So I'm at home, and I get a call. Man, you gotta check your email, man. You gotta look at it. And I get on a computer, and I open this email, and it's a picture of him, like at the bank lobby, and it's Nick Gage, clear as day.
I don't even think I realized the camera was there. I think I was just looking up for some reason, man. But I looked right in that bitch. This was a spur of the moment thing, as you can see. They didn't even have a mask on.
Nick Gage always comes to the ring with a handkerchief on his face, like he's gonna rob a train. And the time that he chooses to not wear the mask is when he actually robs a bank.
They actually found out on the newspaper, and his face is on the front of the page, and I'm like, what? I just didn't know what to say, and I'm like, what happened? And he told me, and I was with him though. I didn't leave him, I didn't turn him in. I was just with him. Whatever he does, I'm with him.
After the robberies, I'm like, we gotta get out of here. So we went to Atlantic City. My only objective is spend this money.
On the run from the law, Nick Gage and his girlfriend Sandra head to Atlantic City. Without an end goal in sight, they enter a casino with one objective.
I'm thinking, you're going to prison, but at least ball out for like a week.
This was a tough situation for me because I'm not gonna be a snitch and I'm not gonna rat him out. But I told him, when you're ready to turn yourself in, let me know. And, I spoke to him every day, and it was, all right, are you ready? No? All right, well, talk to you tomorrow. That went on every day for, 8, 9 days. And then he called me and he said, I'm done, I'm ready. I drove to Atlantic City and I picked him up. I took him to Burger King and he got his favorite. He got a Whopper. And then it was, guess this is it.
I drank a 40 and I smoked a couple blunts and walked in and turned myself in.
In the state Supreme Court of Camden, New Jersey, Nick pleads guilty to second-degree bank robbery and is sentenced to 5 years in New Jersey State Prison.
They took me up to 3 North C, which is a murder block, gang block, and a gun block. So they put me in there, right? And they just go find a bed. Go find a bed, right? It's harder than you think, man. Chris never visited me at all. No phone calls, no nothing.
I visited him regularly from day one until the day he walked out. I honestly felt like he was like a brother to me. But Chris looked down on him. He thought it was shameful, He's a criminal, My brother's a criminal. He got himself into this mess and he can get himself out of it.
So I'm just trying to get everything together. And all of a sudden, I started getting nonstop fan mail from fans that don't know me from a lick. Keep your head up, man. You'll get out soon, man. Stay focused. And I realized, man, people love me, man. And it's not just a couple people. It's like a masses of people.
They really sent him letters. It's no joke. That's what happened. That's what kept him pushing it. It was really amazing how many people really looked up to him.
This is just a stack that came out of one box of letters, that he had gotten and saved. I don't think he realized the impact that he had on people.
There were 3 things I wanted to do. I wanted to come out and show everybody, look, I changed my body, I changed my mind, I changed my soul. And then I wanted to put deathmatch wrestling back on the map, man. And I started training hard.
I mean, he went from eating Burger King Whoppers to exercising hardcore twice a day, every day.
On March 31st, 2015, just over 4 years into his sentence, Nick Gage is released on parole.
That whole night I didn't sleep. I was so excited. We went like an hour before he actually came out. So we're like looking and looking and looking. And finally I see his big old head walking through the thing. As soon as he opens up that door, I just took off running. And it was just one of the happiest days.
Finally, they give you release papers, and then finally you go through them gates, and then, you got your girl coming running up, boom, and Lauderdale was there, and, and shit, man, it was awesome.
Shit off. Take it off.
Take that stuff off, man. We threw that stuff all in the trash can and everything. I brought him his other clothes, put him back on, and it was cool. It was cool.
The king is known. Spent 4.5 years in now. And you know what? I was okay with it.
While Nick Gage returns to raucous crowds all over the country, Brett Lauderdale becomes the owner of Game Changer Wrestling. His goal is to launch Nick to headliner status, and as a tribute to him, Brett's first ever event would be a deathmatch tournament appropriately dubbed the Nick Gage Invitational.
The day before the Nick Gage Invitational, I want to say maybe around 2:30 or 3 p.m., I called his phone and somebody close to him answered and was crying, saying they got him, they took him. They took him and put him in the car and he's gone. He was doing really good for a while, and then he definitely fell into some bad habits again.
You can't run away from them problems. They just follow you. They brought me in for the drug test, and then I tried to falsify urine, and they caught me,
Did he tell you what happened?
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, he told us that he got caught with using someone else's.
Right.
Yeah.
part of it. I think there was more to it than just having a jar of somebody else's piss. He may or may not have also tried to use some sort of device. I don't know. And they caught him. And that was it.
How do you react to this?
You know, I was angry, like, you stupid mother. Like, you had everything here and you couldn't keep it together, you know? And you're in jail right now.
After being a free man for only a few months, a parole violation sends Nick back to prison for almost another 2 years.
Welcome to Game Changer Wrestling!
While Nick serves his sentence, Game Changer Wrestling grows to become the premier promotion for deathmatch wrestling. Determined to give Nick yet another chance, Brett Lauderdale continues to make plans for his return.
The second time, I think I was way more confident that he was going to stay out this time.
What's going on, Nick? What's up, man?
And also it helped that GCW was like a thing now. Like we were among the industry leaders. So not only did he have a home to come back to, but he was right back on the big stage. His popularity grew while he was gone. Like there was no forgetting about Nick Gage.
Fans were writing me for 7 years I was locked up, and just keep your head up. So I wanted to come out and, you know, my gang be together, man. So I came up with the Murder, Death, Kill gang. Murder, Death, Kill gang, that is my fans. It means something to my heart, you know what I'm saying? I didn't realize how popular I was. Man, this MDK everywhere, man. It's like MDK Australia, MDK Europe, MDK Japan, whole 50 state MDK, man. MDK.
While the MDK gang continues to grow worldwide, Brett is arranging one of the most bizarre death matches in wrestling history.
How did this match with David Arquette come about?
The match with David Arquette. I knew you were gonna ask this one.
I'm David Arquette, former WCW champion. You can't take that away from me. I'm sorry.
Arquette pairs off with Bischoff in the ring.
During WCW's decline in the year 2000, while promoting the movie Ready to Rumble, David Arquette won the heavyweight championship in a moment that will forever live in wrestling infamy.
He's over towards Arquette. 1, 2, 3.
What started as a rating stunt would cause wrestling fans to hold a grudge against Arquette for nearly 2 decades.
Arquette won the world title. He can't believe it. David Arquette won the world title.
Most of the audience hated it. They really thought it was disrespectful to the belt. Wrestling was something that was unfinished for me.
A true wrestling fan at heart, Arquette was determined to earn the respect of fans and spent years preparing for his return to the ring.
When I came back, they said you want to wrestle Nick Gage, and I didn't know who Nick Gage was. And I looked him up. I thought this is kind of the perfect place to prove at least that I'm tough enough. I just didn't really want to be a joke anymore.
Arquette made it clear that not only was he down to wrestle Nick, he was down to have a death match.
Are you sure he wants to do a death match? You know, does he know what it is? And he said, yeah. So I said, all right. So we went out to LA, you know, the day before the show. And we went out, all had steaks on Arquette.
We met at Musso and Frank's. I'm from Los Angeles, so I wanted to have proper lunch at the oldest restaurant in Hollywood.
I said, listen, this shit is not fake. This shit is real. That glass is real. You're gonna bleed. Are you sure you want to do this?
I knew it was real glass. I knew it was dangerous. I'm crazier than the next person, so I was into it. But I clearly said at that steak dinner, don't cut me. I'm an actor, so don't cut me. I know I'll bleed, but don't cut me.
So I was like, all right, no problem, man. But you gotta know, man, this is what I do, okay? And I'm not gonna go soft on you. My other guys are nervous because it's David Arquette. He's an actor. I'm just thinking, like, I'm going to whoop his ass.
From Hollywood, California.
You know, I was supposed to hit him a couple times, like, badly.
Oh my God.
And then he was like, then I'll hit you for real.
Oh my God. He just snuffed David Arquette.
This is supposed to be all out, like him freaking out, knocking me to the outside and just diving through the ropes.
Beautiful.
All that shit's him, man. That wasn't no playing out shit.
This guy's willing to do anything. Holy shit.
He started like laying in a little, and I'm like, you know what? I'm about to take it to the next level.
Oh no, Gage! Shot caller! Nick Gage going for blood! Oh no! Oh my God, pizza cutter! Demanding the audience film this!
There was a pizza cutter involved. It was like, you won't even feel it. And I was like, this gonna have some.
What the are you doing, Nick Gage?
But I'm like, I'm feeling like my forehead's cut clean open. And they put it in my mouth too.
Nick Gage, no!
At this point, I'm not having the trust that you need in a wrestling ring. So kind of like building up to being pissed.
David Arquette probably thinking about his spa, his private air-conditioned garage.
I got a piece of a light tube, right? I smash it over its head.
Oh!
He's starting to bug out a little bit.
Oh my God, no, no, no!
Stabbed him in his neck. I was like, oh shit, did I just kill David Arquette?
Everybody's just like, oh shit, we're gonna watch the guy die.
Arquette trying to keep the blood in, it looks like, holy shit.
I've been doing this so long that I looked at his neck and there was nothing squirting. He was fine. He had a little bit of a cut and a leak. And I was like, oh, he's all right. Let's keep going.
When Arquette threw that chair, I was thinking like, he just f***ed up and Nick's about to beat the shit out of David Arquette for real.
I hit him with a judo throw and I sat him down and I said, stay down or I'm gonna hurt you.
Here we go. Gage just got him. Holy shit!
He did good, man, until he started being a crybaby. He ran in Luke Perry's car and got out of there, and I haven't talked to him since.
How are you feeling after the fight yesterday?
Interesting.
You look in pretty good shape.
Thank you. The next day, they got me a TMZ, and I was still pissed because things went out of control. I was in over my head. I shouldn't have been there in the first place. But till you're in a death match, you don't know what a crazy death match is.
Is the leader of the MBK gang.
Nick's gruesome win over Arquette went viral, becoming one of the most talked about events in wrestling that year. As Nick travels the country, his die-hard fan base continues to grow, and his personal and professional life were finally trending in the right direction until tragedy struck again on a cold January morning.
When we found out about his brother, he was actually leaving to go somewhere. I forget where it was. And he called me up. He was very frantic on the phone. I'm like, what's going on? I was heading to work and he told me, and I'm like, what do you mean?
I got news that my family member passed away as a lady in LA. Hey, listen, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I swear to God, I didn't feel like wrestling. I didn't feel like coming here, doing this shit, talking to people. I didn't feel like doing that. When I got here, I got in front of all you crazy motherfuckers. I swear to God, that made me forget about the situation, and it made me forget about what my brother did to himself. So I want to say thank you to you people.
My brother jumped off the bridge, the Walt Whitman Bridge, if you guys ain't familiar with that bridge. You know, he just left a note saying sorry. That's it.
My understanding is he stole a car and the cops threw the lights on, and before they could get to him, he ran and jumped off. And that was it.
It's really upsetting because Chris always had his stuff together. Like, he had the car, he had the wife, he had the kids, he had the job. I've known Chris for so many years. I never thought Chris would have done that. It was shocking, actually.
For years, Nick was the one who was in trouble And then as the years progressed, they totally flipped positions. There was serious mental health issues, serious substance abuse problems, to the point of the family leaving. And Nick would tell me crazy things. He would be insisting that there was somebody coming for him, the cops are coming, the FBI is coming, and serious shit like that. That was the first time that I'd ever really felt that, you know, sensed that kind of emotion and feelings from Nick, that like this really did affect him, you know? Yeah, I think deep down and in reality, probably some regret.
The bridge he jumped off of is behind my house. So as soon as I come out of my house, I see the bridge every day that my brothers jumped off of. So I kind of say a prayer for him, just asking, you know, what's up, Chris, and shit like that. And just like, damn, man, everybody that you grew up with in your household is gone, and it's just you rocking it. I'm just gonna keep moving forward, man, make them proud. It's the only thing I can do.
Do you think that Nick's story is one of redemption?
Who's to say what redemption is? Like, what's the finish line for Nick Gage? When is this all a success? I mean, you could say right now it's a success, but I mean, he's got to finish it out now for the rest of his life. In the traditional sense, I mean, you know, in the traditional addict sense, like every day is like a battle, you know? And some people aren't always up for that battle every single day.
Yeah, time's ticking, you know? I already know in my mind that I'm gonna go out young. Do I have a death wish or nothing like that? No. But I feel like I'm gonna die sooner than later. I believe that.
But you're cool with that?
Yeah, I'm definitely cool with that, man. You know? Just, I'd rather die a good way than a bad way, you know what I mean? But I'll tell you what, I'm 40 years old and I'm still going hard, man.
He's not gonna stop. And I'm not saying he should, because he's got the #1 talent you need. It's not biceps, it's not abs, it's the ability to connect. Vince McMahon would kill to have one person with that connection with the audience that Nick Gage has. So I kind of think his story's just kind of getting started.
If I didn't have him, I don't know where I would be right now. I really do not know. He is my everything. He really, really is. He's my best friend, too. He gets on my nerves, don't get me wrong, but he's all right. He's an all right guy, I'll tell you that much. He's all right. And he's gonna keep going. He's gonna keep going until, I guess, until he turns like 60. Maybe he can't go anymore. I don't know.
Them fans are awesome, man. And I think I represent for like some of them people out there that's gotten in trouble or went through some things and then trying to bounce back. Well, look at Gage, he bounced back like that. All that shit keeps me going. And I'm proud of it. And that's the MDK gang, man.
This is for his brother! Nick Gage with the pain thriller! 1, 2, 3!
The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had debuted the structure months prior in about widely considered a masterpiece. Foley, studying the tape of that inaugural match, realized he lacked the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels. In search of a solution, he consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. According to accounts of the conversation, Funk jokingly suggested starting the match on top of the cage and getting thrown off. While Funk laughed, Foley took it as a legitimate blueprint. He pitched the idea to McMahon and The Undertaker. They were heavily resistant. Foley, a man who freely admits he is terrified of heights, managed to manipulate the conversation, assuring them he had been on top of the cage before and felt completely comfortable. It was a bluff that would change wrestling history. On the night of the event, inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, 16,000 fans watched in utter confusion as Mankind bypassed the cage door and began scaling the massive structure. The first fall. The match officially began some 20 feet above the concrete. The structural integrity of the cell was immediately compromised, designed only with zip ties. The mesh paneling began to give way under the combined 600 pounds of the two athletes. As they brawled near the edge, the commentators at ringside, including myself, grew highly anxious. The margin for error was virtually non-existent. The Spanish announce table below looked like a fragile dollhouse. Then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and hurled him off the edge of the roof. A 300-pound man plummeted 20 feet through the air, crashing violently through the Spanish announce desk. The sound of the impact echoed through the arena like a horrific automobile collision. Backstage, producers, writers, and fellow wrestlers exploded in sheer panic. Many legitimately believed they had just watched a man die on live television. According to medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, the impact was catastrophic. Foley landed terribly on his back, aggravating a dislocated shoulder. Emergency medical technicians rushed to ringside with a gurney. It seemed the match was mercifully over. But as the gurney rolled up the aisle, the unimaginable occurred. Foley rolled off the stretcher, a bloodied, broken man, and began walking back toward the cage. The unplanned catastrophe. Foley climbed the structure a second time. What followed was an event even Foley had not anticipated. The planned sequence called for The Undertaker to choke-slam Mankind onto the mesh roof, theoretically causing the cage to slowly sag for a visual effect. Instead, the zip ties completely failed. Mankind plummeted straight through the roof, falling another 15 to 20 feet, this time slamming back first onto the wooden ring canvas, which is essentially unyielding concrete. Compounding the trauma, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening, striking Foley directly in the face upon impact. This was not a scripted angle. Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Panic consumed the ring as Terry Funk and Dr. Petit scrambled into the cage. For 42 terrifying seconds, Foley was completely unresponsive. According to referee Jimmy Corderas, The Undertaker stared down from the broken roof, instructing those in the ring to check if his opponent was even alive. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his first instinct was not survival, but the show. Through the fog of severe brain injury, he pushed his tongue through a massive, bleeding hole beneath his lower lip to create a memorable television image. A tooth, dislodged by the falling chair, had somehow been inhaled and was visibly lodged in his nostril. The match continued. Barely able to stand, Foley insisted on finishing the bout, introducing thousands of metal thumbtacks into the ring before finally being mercifully pinned by The Undertaker. After 17 brutal minutes, the spectacle was over. Act 4, the price of the spotlight. The immediate aftermath resembled a trauma ward. Behind the curtain, Mr. McMahon approached Foley, thanked him for his sacrifice, but firmly demanded he never attempt anything like it again. Foley's wife, Colette, who had been watching from home with their young children, was furious and terrified, screaming over the phone that his children believed he was dead. The official medical reports cataloged a horrifying list of injuries: a severe, undocumented concussion, 15 stitches underneath the lower lip, 2 missing teeth, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks. Yet, despite the corporate warnings, the bar had been raised, and Foley felt intense, undeniable pressure to maintain his status as a hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, Foley engaged in another deeply controversial bout, an I Quit match against The Rock. Ignoring the pleas of producers, Foley instructed his opponent to strike him with a steel chair without holding back. The script called for a handful of strikes. Instead, while his hands were cupped behind his back, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected chair shots directly to his skull. His young daughter, Noelle, watched in the front row in tears, a moment captured on film that remains incredibly difficult to watch. According to medical experts, taking that level of impact is akin to enduring multiple 25-mile-per-hour car crashes. It was a horrific sequence that blurred the line between entertainment and legitimate assault. causing irreversible brain trauma for the sake of a television storyline. Epilogue: The Echoes of the Cell. Today, the long-term effects of chronic traumatic encephalopathy loom over the wrestling industry like a dark cloud. Neurologists independent of World Wrestling Entertainment flatly told Foley he should never wrestle again. The consequences of concussion upon concussion have manifested in memory issues, chronic pain, and an uncertain future. Foley's family admits they live in constant fear of what his neurological health will look like in 10 or 20 years. To combat the decline, Foley relies on spoken word tours, utilizing the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his brain sharp and to continue feeling the roar of the crowd he has chased his entire life. For years, Foley harbored deep resentment that his entire, multifaceted career was overshadowed by the singular madness of Hell in a Cell. It took time and a quiet conversation with The Undertaker to realize that what they built that night in Pittsburgh will outlive them both. When Foley recently stood in a World Wrestling Entertainment warehouse and placed his hand on the rusted steel of that original cell, the man who spent a lifetime absorbing pain finally broke down in tears. Professional wrestling is a world where men and women engage in a surreal, sublime form of performance art, sacrificing their bodies to the acceptance of total strangers. Mick Foley gave his blood, his teeth, and parts of his mind to that canvas. It was a dangerously magical way to make a living. But as we review the medical files, the terrified faces of his family, and the brutal reality of the footage, we are left looking into the abyss, wondering if any reward on earth is truly worth that kind of risk. The Shadow of the Cell, a descent into wrestling's darkest masterpiece. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a profound look into a night that forever altered the landscape of professional wrestling. I have sat at ringside for decades. I have called the action for the greatest spectacles in sports entertainment. But there are certain nights that do not just stay in your memory, they scar your psyche. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring Premium event, we witnessed a spectacle that defied logic, defied safety, and, quite frankly, defied human endurance. The Undertaker versus Mankind, Hell in a Cell. According to the records, the footage, and the testimonies of those who lived it, this match hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. Going into the broadcast, everyone knew the concept of the cell was dangerous. But no one, not the executives, not the production crew, and certainly not the fans in attendance, knew it was going to be that dangerous. We had two incredible talents out there who liked to push the envelope until it plummeted right over the edge. As the old industry adage goes, the storylines might be scripted, but you absolutely cannot fake gravity. I have been frightened by a multitude of things in the professional wrestling industry over my career. Yet, nothing frightened me as much as the events of that evening. Until, of course, the match progressed into its darkest chapters. What left fans across the globe completely stunned was the unrelenting, horrifying punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, endured until you watched it unfold before your very eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically sustain that level of trauma and live to tell the tale. This match was real. The pain was real. The drama was terrifyingly real. Watching from the monitors, industry veterans were cursing, screaming, and questioning Foley's sanity. The question echoed to the locker room and the arenas. Why are you doing this? Today, Hell in a Cell persists as one of wrestling's most infamous matches. Its legacy is a double-edged sword, an epic, undeniable success of sports entertainment, but equally a grim cautionary tale. According to those backstage, the industry dodged multiple fatal bullets that day. It remains a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But as we peel back the layers of this investigation, we all need to ask ourselves one fundamental question. Was it worth it? The psychology of a hardcore legend. To understand the madness of June 28th, 1998, we first have to understand the mind of Mick Foley. According to psychological profiles and his own admissions, everyone who enters a wrestling business is searching for something they find missing in their own personal lives. For Foley, the drive was rooted in a profound, overwhelming need for acceptance. He was teased heavily in his youth, breeding an intense desire to be liked, to be noticed, and, eventually, to capture that World Wrestling Federation championship. The origins of Sacrifice, Foley's dedication to eliciting a reaction, started early. During his sophomore year of college, Foley once took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. When he hit the concrete, he spat the fake blood into the air. The revelation, as the dorm students watched in shock. One girl screamed that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment, Foley felt immense power. His internal philosophy was cemented. If he could not make people love him conventionally, he would compel them by disgusting and shocking them. He needed reactions. This philosophy birthed the persona of Cactus Jack, a wild, seemingly unhinged brawler. To the audience, he appeared legitimately insane. But underneath the madness was a calculated, charismatic performer. Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations at the time, noted that Foley was a master of ring psychology. He understood that fans gravitated toward unpredictability. By going off-script, by biting his opponents, by leaning into the chaos, Foley forced a spotlight onto himself. Foley did not just stumble into extreme wrestling. His foundation was built in the grueling circuits of Japan. While living in a sparse bedroom with nothing but a mattress on the floor and an old video cassette recorder, he would study Japanese deathmatch for up to 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism, the concept that a wrestler was not just fighting another man, but fighting the brutal environment itself. Guided by legendary brawler Terry Funk, who became his mentor, Foley engaged in explosive, bloody, violent matches involving barbed wire and composition for explosives. Foley was always drawn to the extreme. He believed that bleeding and enduring agony on his hands and knees was undeniable proof that he had created something special. The reluctant arrival and the birth of Mankind. Despite his international underground fame, Foley never saw himself as a fit for the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company was operating in the general audience's rated era, very clean, very traditional, and highly commercialized. Foley's brutal style directly clashed with the corporate image. In fact, World Wrestling Federation Chairman Vince McMahon actively did not want Mick Foley. According to executive producers, McMahon did not find Foley marketable or physically attractive. It took immense convincing from Jim Ross, who pleaded with McMahon to trust his eye for talent. The company desperately needed fresh, unpredictable opponents for their top attraction, The Undertaker. McMahon was tired of relying on slow, towering giants. They needed a lunatic. McMahon finally relented with a strict caveat. He would hire Foley, but he demanded Foley's face be covered. According to Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe, the creative team was tasked with building a character out of absolutely nothing. Thus, Mankind was born, a tortured, masked soul. It was a bizarre, high-risk gimmick that would fail miserably with any other athlete. But Foley possessed a unique ability to connect with the audience. His willingness to try anything, his absolute commitment to the character, made it work. He became the perfect dance partner for The Undertaker. They battled across the globe, laying a foundation of legendary matches. However, by the summer of 1998, the Mankind character had plateaued. Foley knew he needed a monumental moment to revitalize his career. The conception of Hell in a Cell. The stage was set for the King of the Ring premium event. The company wanted to reignite the Mankind versus Undertaker rivalry using a relatively new, terrifying concept, Hell in a Cell. Unlike traditional cage matches where victory was achieved by climbing out or walking through a door, the cell had a roof. It was designed as an inescapable prison. The first iteration of this match featured The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, and it was a technical masterpiece. Foley, by his own admission, watched that first match open-jawed, knowing he did not possess the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels. Foley needed an equalizer. He sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. During their brainstorming session, Funk laughingly suggested a ridiculous concept. What if you started a match on the roof of the cage, and what if you were thrown off? Funk meant it as a dark joke. Foley saw it as a salvation. He pitched the idea to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker. Initially, The Undertaker was entirely against throwing his opponent off the structure, but Foley was dead set, successfully selling the idea to the booking committee. He was not looking at this match as the second act of his career. He was merely trying to keep his head above water, believing this might be his final run in the industry. The fall that stopped the world. As the match approached, the tension backstage was palpable. Referees and producers, including Jimmy Corderas and Gerald Briscoe, were glued to their monitors. When Foley's music hit, he did not enter the cage. He began to climb it. The shock rippled through the 16,000 people inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. The commentators were entirely in the dark. As Foley reached the top of the dark, imposing structure, he realized a horrifying truth. He was terrified of heights. When The Undertaker followed him to the roof, disaster immediately loomed. The top section of the cage was secured only by zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting on the mesh, the structure began to give way. The mesh sank by a foot. The terrifying sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. The original plan was for Foley to execute a suplex on the roof, but The Undertaker wisely cut the sequence short. Realizing the roof was on the verge of total collapse, they brawled toward the edge. From the broadcast booth, the commentators watched in disbelief as the two titans neared the precipice. Then it happened. From nearly 20 feet in the air, a 300-pound man was violently flung off the roof. He plummeted toward the Spanish announce table. According to Foley, the fall felt like slow motion, yet it was over in the blink of an eye. The sound of the impact was sickening. It was a terrifying crash that sounded like a severe automobile accident. Backstage, the locker room erupted in sheer panic. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savanovic, barely bailed out of his chair in time to avoid being crushed. The audience gasped in collective horror. Mothers covered their children's eyes, whispering that it was fake, desperately trying to soothe them, even as they themselves panicked. Foley had survived the impact solely because he possessed the spatial awareness to rotate his body midair, landing flat to distribute the force. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, a highly skilled ringside physician, rushed the area. Emergency medical technicians struggled to get a gurney to the wreckage. Foley was loaded onto the stretcher. His shoulder was dislocated. Everyone, from the executives to the fans, believed the match was officially over. The second act, pushing past the point of no return. But the human will, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to entertain, is a terrifying force. As the gurney was being wheeled up the aisle, Foley realized the audience was completely mesmerized. Against the frantic pleas of officials and doctors screaming for him to stop, Foley rolled off the stretcher. He smiled a broken smile, and he began to climb the cell again. This decision elevated Foley from a great performer to an immortal legend, but it also set the stage for genuine disaster. The next sequence was supposed to be simple, a choke slam on the roof, causing the mesh to sag dramatically for a visual effect. But the integrity of the cell had been compromised. When The Undertaker delivered the choke slam, the mesh completely gave way. Foley plummeted through the roof, crashing violently onto the unforgiving ring mat, a surface that is essentially concrete covered by a thin layer of padding. This fall was completely unplanned. It was vastly more dangerous than the first. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the broken roof, striking Foley directly in the face upon impact. The impact, Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. This was the first time in his legendary career that he was out cold. The damage, he lay completely motionless. His teeth were knocked out. One of his teeth had actually been dislodged and, due to his heavy breathing, was sucked into his nasal passage. The panic. Backstage, Vince McMahon desperately tried to reach the production truck. Foley's wife, Colette, watching from home, was furious, believing her husband had betrayed her trust by hiding this stunt. Terry Funk and Dr. Francois Petit flooded the ring. The Undertaker stared down to the hole in the roof, visibly shaken, instructing Funk to check if Foley was even alive. Funk reported back that Foley was breathing, but there was no one home in his eyes. For 42 seconds, Mick Foley was completely separated from his consciousness. In a modern era, the medical team would have immediately halted the broadcast. But in that era, matches were not stopped. Time was bought. Terry Funk brilliantly initiated a physical altercation with The Undertaker to draw the camera's focus away from the medical emergency. Incredibly, Foley regained consciousness. His first instinct was not survival, but television. Realizing he had a massive puncture wound below his lip, he purposely stuck his tongue to the hole to create a gruesome, unforgettable visual. He then demanded the match continue, insisting on a sequence involving thousands of steel thumbtacks. Foley purposely rolled through the tacks, ensuring his body was covered in them, pushing his physical limits so far that the pain became white noise. Finally, after 17 agonizing minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. The aftermath and the cost of immortality. When Foley returned backstage, his body resembled a war zone. Vince McMahon approached him, thanked him for his immense sacrifice to the company, but sternly demanded that Foley never do anything like that ever again. Foley had a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that lasted for 6 weeks, 15 stitches in his lip, and a severe concussion. Yet, the match was an undeniable triumph. It revolutionized his career. Within 6 months, the man McMahon initially deemed unmarketable was crowned a World Wrestling Federation champion. But success in this industry demands constant escalation. The bar had been raised, and Foley felt obligated to consistently over-deliver. Just 7 months later, Foley engaged in an I Quit match against The Rock. Despite warnings from executives like Jim Ross, Foley orchestrated a sequence involving unprotected steel chair shots to the head. The plan was for 5 shots. The reality was 11 brutal, undefended strikes to the skull. The footage of Foley's wife and young children sobbing in the front row remains one of the most difficult segments to watch in sports documentary history. Foley's daughter, Noelle, admits she has no memory of her father wrestling, likely due to psychological trauma. The fiction of the storyline had resulted in factual brain damage, the long shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The collateral damage of Foley's legendary career is a sobering reality check for the entire professional wrestling industry. Today, the medical community understands the devastating long-term effects of concussions. Taking a severe fall in a ring is likened to experiencing a 25-mile-per-hour automobile collision. Foley endured concussion upon concussion. Independent neurologists warned him that he should never wrestle again, predicting severe neurological decline. Foley now lives under the terrifying shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. There are days when he struggles with memory, times he has driven around his neighborhood, unable to remember where he lives. His family worries constantly about what his cognitive state will be in 10 or 20 years. To combat the decline, Foley continuously engages his mind. He performs spoken word tours, utilizing the stage as mental gymnastics, fighting the fading light by remaining active and stimulated by the fans' adoration. Conclusion: was a canvas worth the blood? When we analyze the career of Mick Foley, we are forced to confront the dark side of sports entertainment. We watch athletes dress in wild costumes and engage in a fantasy form of combat that leaves them physically shattered, all to earn the fleeting acceptance of total strangers. For Foley, it was always about the roar of the crowd. He admits that he cannot call his need for approval a flaw, without acknowledging that it is the exact catalyst for his immense success. For years, Foley harbored resentment toward a Hell in a Cell match, feeling trapped by its shadow, believing it was the only thing he was remembered for. But time and perspective have offered him peace. A poignant conversation with The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night will outlive them both. During a visit to the World Wrestling Entertainment warehouse, Foley found himself standing before the original cell. He reached out, touched the rusted steel, and began to weep. It was a profound realization of his own mortality. He realized how lucky he was to simply be alive. There is no financial reward big enough to justify the risks taken on June 28, 1998. The industry lacked the medical knowledge regarding head trauma that we possess today. Yet, Foley himself cannot say with absolute certainty that he would have changed his path. The world offered him a violent canvas, and he used his own body to create a surreal, sublime, and highly dangerous form of performance art. It was a magical, harrowing way to make a living, but as the roar of the crowd fades and the physical toll mounts, the story of Hell in a Cell remains wrestling's ultimate paradox. A breathtaking masterpiece painted with undeniable, irreversible sacrifice. The Descent into Hell, a cautionary masterpiece. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Whenever we talk about the history of professional wrestling, we inevitably find ourselves drawn to the spectacular, the unbelievable, and sometimes the profoundly disturbing in the annals of sports entertainment. There is one night that forever altered the landscape of the industry. It was June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view. On this night, a match took place that would instantly earn its spot as one of the most shocking spectacles ever broadcast. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground? Hell in a Cell. According to those who were there, Hell in a Cell hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. Fans and insiders alike knew it was going to be intense. But no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. We had two unique talents out there, performers who relished pushing the envelope until it teetered over the absolute edge. People often say wrestling is a scripted performance, but let me tell you this, you cannot fake gravity. In my many years covering this industry, I have been frightened by a lot of things inside the squared circle. But nothing frightened me as much as what happened on that fateful June night. What left fans completely stunned was the unrelenting, unimaginable punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, willingly endured until you saw it with your own eyes. You simply did not believe that a human being could physically undergo this level of trauma and live to tell the tale. The pain was real. The drama was profoundly real. Backstage, peers and executives were cursing, screaming, and questioning his sanity, asking the fundamental question, why are you doing this? Today, this infamous match persists as both an epic success and a grim cautionary tale. According to veteran analysts and performers, the industry dodged multiple fatal bullets that day. When you look back at the footage, it is genuinely staggering to realize that a company will allow a performer to lose consciousness and then, against all medical logic, continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued from these decisions is a story of its own. It forces us to ask, when does it stop? When is it enough? Because the tragic reality of this business is that you pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But as we dissect the events, we must ask ourselves, was it truly worth it? The psychology of a hardcore legend. To understand the madness of Hell in a Cell, we first have to understand the mind of Mick Foley. Everyone who steps into the chaotic world of professional wrestling is usually looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Foley, his motivation was rooted deeply in his childhood. According to his own accounts, he was teased heavily in his youth, which fostered an overwhelming need to be accepted, to be liked, and ultimately to hold that prestigious World Wrestling Federation Championship. Foley's desperate need for reaction started early. During his sophomore year of college, he pulled a stunt that would foreshadow his entire career. He took a swig of red food coloring and took a massive leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. When he hit the ground, he spat out the fake blood. A female student watching the spectacle screamed that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment, Foley felt power. His logic became clear. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them He simply needed a reaction. This relentless pursuit of crowds' roar birthed a career defined by brutality, while Hell in a Cell is often the gateway for new fans. It is vital to note that a normal Mick Foley match was already a theater of pain. He built his legacy on barbed wire, thumbtacks, and fire. He subjected his body to composition for explosives in Japan. He was speared through flaming tables and took devastating falls directly onto exposed concrete. His daughter, Noelle Foley, noted that her father genuinely loved extracting that visceral reaction of horror and shock from the audience. Realism was his greatest tool. Foley himself admitted that he did not believe he had a good match unless he had physical trouble simply walking back to his hotel room. It was not that he enjoyed the physical pain. Rather, he found joy in his ability to endure it and present it to the audience in an entertaining way. The woman behind the mask. Behind every gladiator, there is a family that must bear the emotional brunt of the battles. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, saw a different side of the hardcore legend. When she first met him, she did not see a monster. She saw a gentle, kind person with gentle eyes. It was his corny jokes and terrible humor that won her heart. Their wedding song was, fittingly, Beauty and the Beast. Colette understood his immense commitment to his craft. She knew that when the adrenaline pumped through his veins, his sole drive was to ensure the fans went home talking about the show, even at his own extreme physical risk. To achieve this, Foley initially developed a persona of Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable character that captured the audience's attention through sheer charisma and insanity. Veteran producer Jim Cornette noted that Foley possessed masterful psychological instincts in the ring. Foley understood that fans gravitated towards a performer who seemed genuinely out of control, someone who appeared to be going completely off the script. By taking the audience on an unpredictable, chaotic ride, he forced the spotlight onto himself. From Japan to the World Wrestling Federation, Foley's dedication to his craft was absolute. He and Colette lived humbly in the early days, a mattress on the floor, a tiny black and white television, and a struggling video cassette recorder that played 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day. Foley was captivated by the realism and storytelling of the Japanese death match, where a competitor had to defeat not just their opponent, but their perilous surroundings. He found his footing in Japan, mentored by the legendary Terry Funk, a master of making audiences suspend their disbelief. Together, they engaged in explosive, violent, and fiery death matches. Foley would crawl on his hands and knees through broken glass and wire, viewing the scars as proof that he was doing something special. Because of his extreme style, Foley never envisioned himself in the World Wrestling Federation. At that time, the company was heavily geared toward the general audience, presenting a relatively sterile, family-friendly product. Foley's travel partner and close friend, Al Snow, recalled that Chairman Mr. McMahon initially had no interest in Foley, viewing him as unmarketable and unattractive. However, Jim Ross, who served as Vice President of Talent Relations, saw raw potential. He needed fresh opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. Mr. McMahon had been feeding giants to The Undertaker, a formula that was growing stale. Ross knew they needed a lunatic. According to backstage lore, Mr. McMahon finally slammed his hand on a desk and agreed to hire Foley, but with one strict condition. They had to cover his face with mask. From this directive, the character of Mankind was born. Hall of Famer Gerald Briscoe recalled the immense challenge of building a character out of essentially nothing. Yet, this bizarre concept succeeded solely because of Mick Foley's unmatched ability to connect with an audience. His commitment was total. As Ross noted, Foley would not turn down any challenge. The new problem for the producers was not motivating Foley, but finding a way to stop him from destroying himself. The conception of the cell. Foley and The Undertaker went on to build a remarkable foundation, wrestling in 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches across the globe. But by the summer of 1998, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He believed he needed to do something drastic to cement their legacy. For the King of the Ring event, producers decided to place the two men inside Hell in a cell. The concept of the cell, a cage or the roof where escaping over the top or through the door was theoretically impossible, had only been used once before. That first match, featuring The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, was a masterpiece, setting an incredibly high bar. Foley openly admitted he did not possess the athletic prowess of Shawn Michaels. Searching for a way to stand out, Foley sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the cell roof, and that Foley should get thrown off. What started as a dark joke took root in Foley's mind. He pitched the idea to The Undertaker and Mr. McMahon. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant about throwing a man off a structure that high, but Foley's relentless persuasion eventually secured their reluctant agreement. Foley viewed this match not as a career renaissance, but as a final, desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He fully believed that when this run ended, his career would be over. The first fall. On the night of the match, 16,000 fans packed the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. As the ominous structure was lowered, Foley made his entrance. Instead of entering the cell door, he began to climb the exterior wall. The crowd, the commentators, and the officials were visibly shocked. Backstage, producer Jimmy Corderas watched the monitors in disbelief. Lead announcer Jim Ross and his broadcast partner Jerry Lawler were completely in the dark about the planned stunt. Foley had assured management he was comfortable with the height, but the truth was he was terrified. He admitted he was not good with heights, and as he waited on top of the cage for The Undertaker, he privately wondered how he could gracefully climb down without ruining his career. When The Undertaker joined him on the roof, the true danger of the situation became apparent. The top of the cage was secured with simple plastic zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting on the mesh, the roof began to visibly give way, sinking by nearly a foot with every step. The sound of zip ties violently snapping echoed through the arena. An early attempt by Foley to suplex The Undertaker was quickly abandoned. The Undertaker realized that such a move would likely send them both plummeting through the unstable roof. Instead, they brawled toward the edge of the cell, directly above the Spanish announcer's table. Jim Ross recalled watching them near the edge, praying that they would not attempt anything foolish. The margin for error was microscopic. The announcer table looked like a tiny dollhouse from that height. Then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and hurled him off the edge of the cell. A 300-pound man fell nearly 20 feet, crashing violently through the broadcast table. The visual was horrifying. The sound of the impact was sickening. Backstage, peers and executives exploded in panic, reacting as if they had just witnessed a fatal car accident. Announcer Hugo Savanovic had to literally dive out his chair to avoid being crushed. The audience gasped in collective horror. Many believed they had just watched a man die on live television. Colette Foley, watching at home with her young children, desperately tried to soothe them by insisting it was fake, even as she silently panicked. Medical personnel, led by Dr. Francois Petit, alongside Terry Funk and Mr. McMahon, rushed to the ringside area. Dr. Francois noted that Foley had landed disastrously on his back and dislocated his shoulder. A stretcher was brought out. The match, it seemed, was definitively over. Foley was strapped to the gurney and wheeled down the aisle. The second fall. But the story did not end there. As Foley was being wheeled away, he realized that the longer he prolonged the drama, the more invested the audience became. In a display of sheer, incomprehensible willpower, he rolled off the stretcher. Ignoring the pleas of officials telling him the match was over, he marched back to the ring and began climbing the cell once again. The audience erupted. Backstage, however, panic set in. Everyone knew what Foley had initially planned, but no one knew what was going to happen next. The Undertaker met him on top of the roof once more. The planned sequence called for a chokeslam, which was supposed to cause the cage mesh to safely and gradually give way. leaving Foley dangling. That is not what happened. When The Undertaker delivered the chokeslam, the zip ties failed entirely. The panel of the cage gave way instantly, and Foley plummeted straight through the roof, plummeting roughly 15 feet and slamming with catastrophic force onto the unforgiving ring canvas. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell for the hole right behind him, striking him directly in the face upon impact. Jim Ross, screaming at the monitors, completely lost his composure. He later admitted he tried to call the executives backstage to stop the match, but could not reach anyone. The impact was equivalent to a 25-mile-per-hour car crash. Foley lay completely motionless. It was the first time in his entire career that he had been legitimately knocked unconscious. The cage was immediately flooded with personnel. When Dr. Francois and Terry Funk reached him, Foley was unresponsive. The Undertaker, looking down from the roof, instructed Funk to check if Foley was even still alive. Funk confirmed he was breathing. For 42 seconds, Mick Foley was completely blacked out. Realizing the gravity of the situation and needing to buy the medical team precious time, Terry Funk improvised. He attacked The Undertaker, drawing the focus away from the lifeless Foley. According to Jim Ross, if there was ever a match in the history of the industry that should have been stopped, it was this one. But in that era, matches were rarely halted. Performers simply bought time. Incredibly, Foley regained consciousness. His first sight was Terry Funk's shoes. Disoriented and severely concussed, his instinct as a performer took over. He realized he had a massive, gaping wound below his lip. In a moment of grotesque showmanship, he pushed his tongue to the hole in his face to create a gruesome visual for cameras. He was also sporting a bizarre smile, revealing a missing tooth that had been knocked out by the steel chair. Medical reports later suggested the tooth had been knocked into his throat, and due to his heavy breathing, it had traveled up and lodged in his nasal passage. The bloody climax. Despite suffering a severe concussion, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, and a bruised kidney, Foley insisted on finishing the match. The pain was real. The concern in The Undertaker's eyes was real, but Foley's determination was unyielding. To ensure the fans got their money's worth, Foley called for his signature thumbtacks. Thousands of sharp tacks were scattered across the ring canvas. Foley willingly took several brutal impacts directly onto the tacks, purposely rolling around to ensure they stuck to his body. He understood that risking his well-being cemented the audience's belief in him. Finally, after 17 grueling minutes, The Undertaker delivered a final maneuver and pinned Mankind. The match was over, but the legend was permanently cemented. 16,000 fans in Pittsburgh had witnessed a spectacle of human endurance that defied logic. When Foley returned backstage, he was greeted by a horrified but grateful locker room. While Dr. Francois agonizingly plucked thumbtacks from Foley's flesh, Mr. McMahon approached him. The chairman thanked Foley for everything he had done for company, but firmly demanded that he never do anything like that again. The physical toll was immense. 15 stitches, 2 missing teeth, and weeks of recovery for his internal injuries. But professionally, the match changed everything. Within 6 months, the man who was once deemed too unattractive and unmarketable to hire became the World Wrestling Federation champion. The I Quit match and the ultimate price. However, the bar for violence had been irreparably raised. Just 7 months later, Foley found himself pushing his limits once again, this time against The Rock in an infamous I Quit match. The match was designed to be brutal, but things spiraled dangerously out of control. The script called for Foley to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head while handcuffed. Foley, ever perfectionist, instructed The Rock to hit him hard. Instead of 5 shots, Foley absorbed 11 horrifying, unprotected strikes to his skull. His wife and young children were seated in the front row, forced to watch as their father was brutally battered. Noelle Foley later confessed that she has absolutely no memory of her father wrestling. A psychological block likely caused by the extreme trauma of watching him absorb such horrific punishment. The collateral damage of these decisions is heartbreaking. For the sake of a television storyline, Foley sustained severe brain trauma. The long-term consequences of such extreme physical sacrifice are impossible to ignore. Today, medical science understands much more about chronic traumatic encephalopathy and the devastating effects of repetitive concussions. Foley eventually sought independent medical advice after accompanying neurologists warned him to never wrestle again. He experienced memory lapses, sometimes driving around and forgetting where he lived. His loved ones live in constant worry about what his health will look like in 10 or 20 years. To combat the cognitive decline, Foley now focuses on spoken word tours, treating the performances as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp and to continue feeling the stimulation of a live audience. Was it worth it? Mick Foley is a multiple-time champion, a best-selling author and charitable figure. Yet, he knows he will forever be defined by Hell in a Cell. For years, he harbored resentment toward the match, feeling that his entire life's work was eclipsed by one chaotic evening. It left him in a dark place, feeling as though he had accomplished nothing else of value. But time offers perspective. A conversation with The Undertaker helped Foley realize that what they created that night would outlive them both. He eventually embraced the legacy. When Foley recently visited the company warehouse and touched the original cell, the emotion overwhelmed him. A man who built his career on pain broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of his own mortality and the sheer luck that allowed him to walk away from that structure alive. As observers, we must view Hell in a Cell as a paradox. It was a masterpiece of storytelling and a testament to human endurance, but it was also a terrifying display of unnecessary risk. According to the documents and testimonies, there is no financial reward big enough to justify the danger Foley put himself in. Yet, when asked if he would do it differently knowing what we now know about head injuries, Foley remains uncertain. The world offered him a canvas to create what he called surreal, sublime performance art. For Mick Foley, the roar of the crowd, the widening of their eyes, and their absolute belief in his sacrifice made it all worthwhile. It was a magical, brutal way to make a living, and on that June night, it provided one of the most powerful, enduring moments in the history of sports entertainment. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of the squared circle. Good night. Dark Side of the Ring, The Descent of Mankind. Act 1, The Architecture of a Masochist. On the 28th of June, 1998, the world of professional wrestling changed forever. Inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, a sprawling structure of steel was lowered from the rafters for the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring event. It was a concept designed to evoke sheer terror. Hell in a Cell. What happened under that roof that night persists in the annals of sports entertainment as both an epic success and a grim cautionary tale. To understand the madness of that summer night, we must first understand the mind of the man who willingly walked into the abyss. Mick Foley, known to masses as Mankind, was a man driven by a desperate, almost tragic need for acceptance. According to Foley himself, his childhood was marred by isolation. He possessed an overwhelming need to be liked. When he realized he could not easily win the adoration of his peers, he discovered a darker currency, shock. As a college sophomore, Foley once swallowed red food coloring and leapt off a bed onto a concrete floor, spitting the faux blood to the disgust and awe of his dorm mates. In that moment of revulsion, he found power. If he could not make them love him, he would make them sick to their stomachs. This craving for a reaction led Foley across the globe. He forged his path not in the glitz and glamour of American television, but in the brutal, visceral death match to Japan. Immersing himself in videocassette tapes for 12 hours a day, he studied the psychology of violence. Under mentorship of the legendary Terry Funk, a man widely considered the greatest at making audiences suspend disbelief, Foley embraced fire, barbed wire, and composition for explosives. He believed that bleeding on the concrete was proof that he was doing something special. Yet, despite his international infamy, The gates of the World Wrestling Federation were initially closed to him. Vince McMahon, the architect of the empire, saw no value in Foley. According to Jim Ross, who served as vice president of talent relations at the time, McMahon did not find Foley marketable or attractive. The product was in a family-friendly era, and Foley's brand of visceral realism did not fit the mold. But Ross saw something undeniable. He urged McMahon to take a chance. McMahon finally relented, slamming his hand on a table with a strict condition: Foley's face must be covered. From this directive of disdain, the character of Mankind was born, a masked, tortured soul designed for one singular purpose: to be a compelling sacrificial lamb for the company's greatest attraction, The Undertaker. Act 2, pushing the envelope. Foley and The Undertaker traveled the globe, laying a foundation across 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches. But by 1998, the Mankind character had plateaued. Foley felt an overwhelming pressure to elevate their legacy. 9 months prior, The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had competed in the inaugural Hell in a Cell match. It was a masterpiece of storytelling and athleticism that set an almost insurmountable standard. Foley knew he lacked the nimble grace of Michaels. If he could not out-wrestle the past, he decided he would out-survive it. According to behind-the-scenes accounts, it was a joking conversation with Terry Funk that planted the seed of insanity. Funk chuckled and suggested that Foley should start the match on the roof of the cage and get thrown off. What was meant as dark humor became a terrifying fixation for Foley. He pitched the idea casually to McMahon and The Undertaker. The Undertaker was heavily opposed to throwing his opponent off the immense structure, but Foley was relentless. He saw this match not as a second act to his career, but as a desperate bid to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed that after this run, his career would be over. As the 16,000 fans in Pittsburgh watched Foley make his way to the ring, no one could have anticipated the horrors that were about to unfold. Act 3, the fall that stopped time. When the match began, Foley did not enter the cage door. He began to climb. At the commentary desk, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were entirely in the dark. The live audience murmured in confusion and mounting dread. Backstage, the production crew, led by Gerald Briscoe, sat glued to their monitors. Foley, who privately harbored a severe fear of heights, reached the top of the chain-link roof. The Undertaker followed. They stood nearly 20 feet above the concrete arena floor. According to sources, the top section of the cage was merely secured with zip ties. As 600 pounds of human weight shifted across the mesh, the roof gave way by a foot. The sound of plastic ties snapping echoed through the arena. The battle inched dangerously close to the edge. Down below, the Spanish announcer's desk looked like a fragile dollhouse. Then, in a moment that defied all logic and human instinct, the Undertaker grabbed Foley and hurled him into the abyss. Time seemed to slow down. A 300-pound man plummeted through the air, crashing violently through the announcer's table. Hugo Savinovic, the Spanish commentator, barely escaped being crushed. The sound of the impact was sickening. Backstage, the locker room erupted in absolute panic. It looked like a fatal car crash. Jim Ross, broadcasting live to millions, famously shouted that the man had been broken in half. For all intents and purposes, the match was over. Terry Funk, breaking the cardinal rule of non-interference, rushed to the wreckage to check if Foley was still breathing. Dr. Francois Petit, the company's eccentric but brilliant medical professional, sprinted down the aisle. Foley was loaded onto a stretcher. The crowd stood in stunned silence. The reality of gravity had pierced the illusion of professional wrestling. Act 4, the unscripted catastrophe. But Foley was not finished. Driven by an unfathomable commitment to his craft and the roar of the crowd, Foley fought off the medical personnel. With a dislocated shoulder, he forced himself off the stretcher. Against the desperate pleas of everyone around him, he began to climb the cell once more. If the first fall was a calculated, carefully executed stunt, what happened next was pure, unadulterated catastrophe. The The script called for The Undertaker to chokeslam Foley onto the mesh, intending for the roof to sag dramatically. Instead, the cage gave way entirely. Foley plummeted straight through the roof, crashing violently onto the unforgiving wooden boards of the ring below. It was a fall entirely devoid of preparation. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the breach directly behind him, striking him square in the face upon impact. Silence fell over the arena. Backstage, anger mixed with terror. Even his closest friends believed he was dead. This was the first time in his career that Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. He lay motionless. The Undertaker, looking down from the torn roof, instructed Terry Funk to see if his opponent was still alive. Funk desperately bought time, taking a physical confrontation with The Undertaker just to divert the audience's eyes away from the tragedy unfolding on the mat. 42 seconds vanished from Foley's memory. When he finally regained consciousness, the sight was macabre. He was bleeding profusely from a massive wound beneath his lip. One of his teeth had been knocked entirely out of his mouth due to his heavy breathing. It had traveled up his throat and lodged inside his nostril. Yet, in a display of frightening dedication, Foley pushed his tongue to the hole in his lip and smiled for cameras. The 17-minute match concluded only after Foley introduced thousands of metal thumbtacks into the ring, intentionally taking falls onto the sharp steel to elicit one final roar from the crowd. When the bell finally rang, the audience knew they had witnessed something entirely real. Act 5, The Price of Fame. Foley returned backstage to a mixture of awe and reprimand. Vince McMahon greeted him with immense gratitude, followed immediately by a stern demand that Foley never do anything like that again. Medical staff worked frantically to pluck thumbtacks from his flesh. He had a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, 15 stitches in his lip, a bruised kidney that would ache for 6 weeks, and an undocumented concussion. The match fundamentally altered the trajectory of his career. 6 months later, the man McMahon once deemed unmarketable was crowned the world champion. But the bar had been raised, and the pressure to over-deliver became an addiction. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed the boundaries again in a notoriously brutal I Quit match against The Rock. The original plan called for 5 steel chair strikes to the head. In the heat of the moment, Foley took 11. With his wife Colette and his young children in the front row, the line between scripted entertainment and genuine trauma was obliterated. His daughter, Noelle, recalls the sickening fear of watching her father sustain what could have been fatal brain damage for the sake of television. According to medical professionals, the human body is not built to withstand such punishment. A single bump in the ring is likened to a 25-mile-per-hour car collision. Foley endured concussions upon concussions. Independent neurologists explicitly warned him to retire, stating that if he continued, he would end up crippled. The shadow of chronic traumatic encephalopathy looms heavily over his legacy. Today, Foley admits to struggling with memory loss, fighting a daily battle against the long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma. Epilogue, was it worth it? Mick Foley sacrificed his body, his neurological future, and the peace of mind of his family, all to earn the acceptance of total strangers. For years, he harbored resentment toward the Hell in a cell match, frustrated that his entire career was defined by a single night of torture. Yet, as time passed, perspective shifted. During a reflective conversation, The Undertaker told Foley that what they created that night would outlive them both. It was a masochistic masterpiece, a terrifying display of human endurance that forever etched Foley's name into the foundation of professional wrestling history. When Foley recently visited a company warehouse and laid his hands on the original steel panels of the cell, the weight of history brought the hardcore legend to tears. It was a realization of how fragile life truly is and how close he came to losing it all. He survived the cell. He achieved his lifelong dream of being loved by the masses. But the question remains, echoing to the empty arenas and the halls of medical offices, lingering in the minds of everyone who watched a man break himself in half for their entertainment. Was it truly worth it? The anatomy of a masterpiece, Hell in a Cell. Prologue, The Weight of Gravity. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view, the industry witnessed a spectacle that would permanently alter the landscape of professional wrestling. The bout was The Undertaker versus Mankind inside the unforgiving steel structure known as Hell in a Cell. According to the accounts of those who lived it, this match hits the consciousness like a heavy mallet. It was expected to be chaotic, but no one could have anticipated the sheer magnitude of the madness that would unfold. You had two talents out there who thrived on pushing the envelope, pushing it so far that it inevitably tipped over the edge. We often hear the refrain that professional wrestling is predetermined, but as anyone who watched that night will tell you, you cannot fake gravity. In my years of covering this industry, I have been frightened by many things inside the squared circle, but nothing instilled fear quite like this event. What left fans across the globe completely stunned was the unrelenting, sheer physical punishment that Mick Foley endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically sustain that level of trauma and survive. The match was real. The pain was undeniably real. The drama unfolding in front of 16,000 people was real. According to colleagues watching backstage, the reaction was a mixture of awe and absolute terror, with many cursing, screaming, and questioning the sanity of the man putting his life on the line. Why go to such extremes? This infamous match persists today as both an epic success in sports entertainment and a harrowing cautionary tale. As observers noted that night, the industry dodged several fatal bullets. It remains a staggering thought that a performer could be rendered completely unconscious, only for the match to continue. The collateral damage that ensued from that night, and the decisions made during those 15 minutes in the spotlight, is a debt paid over a lifetime. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece. But it forces all of us to ask the definitive question, was it worth it? Part 1. The Psychology of a Masochist. To understand the events of 1998, we must first analyze the mind of the man known as the hardcore legend. According to Foley's own reflections, everyone who enters the wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, a childhood filled with being teased birthed an overwhelming, insatiable need to be liked, and a driving ambition to capture the championship belt. This psychological need manifested early. According to a story from his sophomore year in college, Foley once took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. As he spit the blood-like concoction out, the reaction of his peers, a visceral disgust, gave him an intoxicating sense of power. If he could not command their love, he realized he could at least command their absolute shock. He needed reactions. He needed to be noticed. For many fans, the Hell in a Cell match is a gateway into the sport. It is the first match they are shown. But as Foley's own children note, it creates a false expectation. A normal Mick Foley match was already inherently brutal, often involving thumbtacks, fire, barbed wire, or C4 explosives in Japan. He was a man willing to be speared through flaming tables or take punishing falls directly onto concrete. As his daughter Noelle observed, he simply loved eliciting that visceral gasp from the audience. Realism was his ultimate tool. He admittedly did not enjoy the physical pain, but he found immense satisfaction in his ability to endure it and project it into compelling storytelling. He gauged the success of his performances by how difficult it was to walk back to his hotel room. Yet, behind his terrifying on-screen persona was a remarkably gentle man. Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, fell in love not with a monster, but with a kind man possessing terrible humor and an affinity for corny jokes. Their wedding song was, fittingly, Beauty and the Beast, but she understood his deep commitment to his craft. When the adrenaline pumped, his singular drive was to ensure the audience left talking about the show, even at the severe risk of his own well-being. Part 2. The Road to Mankind. Before the Cell, there was Cactus Jack, a wild, unpredictable, and seemingly unhinged persona. Jim Cornette, a producer for the company at the time, recognized Foley's brilliant grasp of ring psychology. Foley understood that fans were captivated by chaos, by performers who appeared to completely disregard the script. He could take the audience on an emotional ride, and in doing so, his reputation exploded. His education was unconventional. His bedroom furniture once consisted of a mattress on the floor and a broken television continuously, playing Japanese wrestling tapes for up to 12 hours a day. He was drawn to the realism and the intense storytelling of the Japanese death matches, where a competitor had to defeat not just their opponent, but their perilous surroundings. It was in Japan that Foley found a mentor in Terry Funk, widely regarded as a master of suspending disbelief. Together, they engaged in explosive, fiery, and bloody death matches. Foley spent hours crawling through debris, viewing the scars as proof that he was creating something special. He saw Japan as a forever home, never envisioning himself fitting into the pristine, curated mold of the World Wrestling Federation at that time. And initially, he was right. According to executive Jim Ross, Chairman Vince McMahon had absolutely no desire to hire Mick Foley. McMahon did not see him as marketable or attractive. Ross had to leverage his own reputation to give Foley a chance, recognizing that the company desperately needed a unique, chaotic opponent for one of their biggest stars, The Undertaker. The era of matching The Undertaker against slow, plodding giants had grown stale. They needed a lunatic. McMahon famously capitulated, slamming his hand on a table and agreeing to bring Foley in under the strict condition that his face be covered. Thus, the character of Mankind was born. According to Hall of Famer Jerry Briscoe, the creative team was tasked with building a compelling character out of a mandate designed to hide the performer. Yet, this supposed punishment became Foley's greatest asset. Without Foley's unparalleled ability to connect with an audience, the bizarre mask and character would have failed miserably. He threw himself into the role with reckless abandon. As Jim Ross noted, Foley was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. The immediate challenge for management was no longer getting him over with the crowd. It was keeping him from killing himself in the process. Part 3. The Pitch and the Plunge. Mankind and The Undertaker built a legendary foundation together, clashing in 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches across the globe. But by 1998, Foley felt his character was plateauing. He needed a moment that would cement their legacy, not detract from it. The stage was set for King of the Ring, utilizing a recently developed concept, Hell in a Cell. The traditional cage match allowed a victor to escape over the top or through the door. The cell was different. It had a roof. 2 men enter, 1 leaves. The bar had been set astronomically high 9 months prior, when Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker competed in the inaugural Hell in a Cell match, about many still consider the technical pinnacle of the match type. Foley watched that match in awe, fully aware that he possessed none of the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels. He needed a different approach. According to Foley, he consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. In a moment of dark humor, Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the structure, and Foley should get thrown off. What started as a laugh became a terrifying obsession. Foley pitched the idea casually to McMahon and The Undertaker. Both were initially highly skeptical. The Undertaker was not on board with throwing his opponent off a massive structure, but Foley was resolute. He viewed this not as a long-term career strategy, but as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water, fully believing his career was nearing its end. As the match approached, the anticipation was palpable. Commentator Jim Ross noted the immense pressure on Foley, knowing he had to outdo the inaugural match while lacking nimbleness. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Referee Jimmy Corderas, watching from the production monitors alongside Gerald Briscoe, had the perfect vantage point. No one knew exactly what to anticipate, and no one could have imagined the reality. When Mankind's music hit, he bypassed the door and immediately began scaling the cell. The shock was universal. Foley had assured management he had tested the roof, but according to his own admission, he was terrified of heights. The sight of mankind standing atop the monstrous structure established an immediate sense of dread. When the Undertaker joined him, the reality of the danger became apparent. The roof was secured by zip ties. With over 600 pounds of human weight shifting across the mesh, the panels began to buckle, dropping by a foot with every step. Zip ties could be heard snapping like gunfire. The structure was failing. Foley attempted a suplex, which the Undertaker smartly countered. Realizing the mesh was close to completely giving way, they migrated toward the edge of the cage, hovering above the announce tables. Observers backstage and at ringside thought there was no margin for error. The tables below looked like tiny dollhouse furniture. Then it happened. A 300-pound human being was hurled from nearly 20 feet in the air. Time seemed to warp. It moved in agonizing slow motion, yet finished in the blink of an eye. The impact of Foley crashing through the Spanish announce table produced a sound that terrified everyone in the arena. The reaction was instinctual. Broadcasters, fans, and colleagues exploded in concern. According to those watching, it felt like witnessing a horrific car accident. The collective thought was unified. He is dead. There was an audible, horrified gasp from the 16,000 in attendance. At home, families struggled to process the violence, desperately trying to reassure terrified children that it was just a show. But the danger was all too real. Had the Undertaker thrown him a fraction too far or too short, Foley would have hit the concrete or the spectators. Miraculously, Foley had the presence of mind to adjust his body mid-air, landing as flat as possible on the table to cushion the catastrophic fall. Dr. Francois Petit, the company's eccentric and highly skilled medical professional, rushed to the scene alongside Terry Funk. Foley had landed terribly on his back and on a dislocated shoulder. EMTs struggled to bring a gurney through the wreckage. The match was seemingly over. He was secured to the board. But as the gurney moved up the aisle, the unimaginable happened. Foley, realizing the crowd was entirely captivated, rose from the stretcher. With a dislocated shoulder and a battered body, he began the arduous climb back up the cell. Part 4. The Unplanned Disaster. Backstage, officials and peers screamed at the monitors, pleading for him to stay down. His return created an aura of absolute invincibility, turning him into a massive star in that exact moment. But what happened next was not part of the plan. The next sequence was supposed to be a visual spectacle. A choke slam on the roof that would cause the mesh to sag dramatically. However, the weakened zip ties failed entirely. The Undertaker chokeslammed mankind, and the mesh tore open. Foley plummeted freely into the ring, crashing violently onto the unforgiving surface. This impact was vastly different from the first. The ring mat offers little protection. Falling from that height is akin to hitting solid cement. Compounding the tragedy, a heavy steel folding chair fell through the opening directly behind him, striking him brutally in the face upon impact. This was the moment genuine panic set in. According to his family and colleagues, they thought he was gone. His wife was furious, believing he had hidden this dangerous stunt from her. But the truth was far more frightening. It was an accident. For the first time in his career, Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Medical staff, alongside Terry Funk, flooded the ring. The Undertaker, looking down from the broken roof, instructed Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. For 42 agonizing seconds, Foley had no memory of the event. In a desperate bid to buy time, Terry Funk initiated a physical altercation with the Undertaker, taking a choke slam himself to distract the audience while doctors tended to Foley. According to industry standards of the time, matches were rarely stopped for injury. Performers simply bought time. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his first sight was Terry Funk's shoes. Operating on pure instinct and adrenaline, he rose to his feet. His face was a horrific mass of trauma. A severe wound tore through his lower lip, and in a macabre display of showmanship, he pushed his tongue through the hole for the cameras. More shockingly, a tooth had been knocked out by the chair and had lodged inside his nasal cavity, a result of violent inhalation during the trauma. The match continued. The pain, the drama, the sheer terror in the eyes of everyone involved were completely real. Foley, still severely concussed, demanded the introduction of thumbtacks. He purposely threw his battered body onto the tacks, ensuring they stuck to his flesh to maximize the visual impact. The adrenaline masked the agony. He was no longer just experiencing pain. He had become a part of it. After 17 harrowing minutes, The Undertaker secured the victory. Foley refused the stretcher once again, walking out to a crowd that had been pushed to the absolute limits of their emotional endurance. Part 5. The Aftermath and the Toll. The immediate aftermath backstage was a scene of profound relief and severe caution. Vince McMahon approached Foley, thanked him for his unimaginable sacrifice, and sternly demanded that he never attempt anything like it again. Foley, still in a haze, asked The Undertaker if they had executed the thumbtack spot, completely unaware that a doctor was actively pulling them out of his body at that very moment. The physical toll was staggering. A dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a severely bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, 15 stitches beneath his lip, and 2 lost teeth. Yet, professionally, the gamble paid off. The match fundamentally altered how the audience perceived him. 6 months later, the man Vince McMahon, once deemed unmarketable, became the world champion. But the bar had been irreversibly raised. The hunger for the audience's roar pushed Foley to continually escalate the violence. Just 7 months later, he engaged in a brutal I Quit match with The Rock. Against the advice of his peers, Foley took 11 unprotected steel chair shots to the head, hands cupped behind his back. According to his daughter, the footage of that match remains a source of deep trauma. The line between scripted entertainment and horrifying reality was obliterated. He had sustained legitimate brain damage for a television storyline. The long-term consequences of such reckless physical sacrifice are grim. Foley endured concussion after concussion. There were days he would drive and forget where he lived. Independent neurologists explicitly warned him to stop wrestling, warning of permanent damage. Today, the medical community understands the devastating reality of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a terrifying consequence of repetitive brain trauma. The impact of a wrestling fall is often compared to a 25-mile-per-hour car crash. Foley's future health remains a daily source of deep anxiety for his family. Epilogue: The Price of Legacy. Mick Foley is a man who gave his physical being to the industry. He pushed the absolute limits of human endurance to earn the acceptance of total strangers. For years, he harbored resentment toward the Hell in a cell match, feeling it overshadowed everything else he had accomplished. But time and a conversation with The Undertaker brought perspective. The Undertaker reminded him that what they created that night would outlive them both. It was a piece of surreal, sublime performance art painted in blood and unimaginable risk. Recently, while visiting a company warehouse, Foley came face-to-face with the original cell, according to his daughter. He touched the steel and began to weep, a rare display of emotion for a man who had endured so much. It was a stark reminder of his own mortality, a realization of how perilously close he came to losing everything. There is no monetary reward significant enough to truly cover that level of risk. While Foley admits he might have made different choices had the modern science of head injuries been available, he looks back on his career with a complex fondness. To step into the arena, to command the awe of thousands, to hear that deafening roar, it was a magical way to make a living. But as the cheers fade into history and the physical bill comes due, the legacy of Hell in a Cell remains an enduring, haunting question for the industry and the fans who consume it. We asked them to give us everything, but did we ever stop to ask what it would cost them? The Dark Side of the Ring, The Ballad of Mankind. Voiceover, deep resonant, with the gravitas of a seasoned sports broadcaster. Professional wrestling is a world built on illusions. It is a spectacle of predetermined outcomes. A grand theater where heroes and villains clash under the bright arena lights. We are told it is entertainment. We are told to suspend our disbelief. But there's an undeniable, chilling truth that lingers in the shadows of the squared circle. You cannot fake gravity. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event, that reality came crashing down. It was a night that etched itself into the annals of sports entertainment, delivering a spectacle that hit the collective consciousness of the audience like a mallet. The Undertaker versus Mankind, Hell in a Cell. This is not just a story about a wrestling match. This is a forensic examination of human endurance, a psychological study of a man who pushed the envelope until it fell over the absolute edge, and a cautionary tale about the collateral damage of seeking acceptance in front of a roaring crowd, one of wrestling's most infamous encounters. This match persists as both an epic success and a terrifying moment where tragedy was separated from triumph by the slimmest of margins. The question that haunts his legacy is simple, yet profoundly heavy. When does it stop? When is it enough? And ultimately, was it worth it? Part 1. The Anatomy of an Enigma. To understand the sheer madness of that summer night in 1998, one must first look at the man behind the leather mask. Mick Foley was not your traditional wrestling superstar, according to those who knew him best. Everyone who enters the wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Foley, a history of being teased fueled an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked. Documents and accounts from his early life paint a picture of a man willing to go to extremes for a reaction. As a college sophomore, he once consumed red food coloring before executing a diving leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed animal resting on a concrete floor. As the fake blood spewed from his mouth, the horrified reaction of a female onlooker, who called it the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, sparked a revelation. If he could not compel people to love him, he would settle for the immense power of disgusting them. Realism was a big tool. I didn't think I was having a good match unless I had trouble getting back to my hotel room. Foley thrived on the visceral reactions of the crowd. Whether it was a gasp of an audience or a collective shudder of revulsion, he needed that connection. He carved his path not through technical wizardry, but through an almost horrifying threshold for pain. From his early days competing in explosive, barbed wire, fire-laden death matches in Japan, often wrestling up to 12 hours a day on old tapes in a sparse apartment, he found his calling. Mentored by the legendary Terry Funk, Foley learned the art of suspending disbelief. He adopted the persona of Cactus Jack, a charismatic, unhinged brawler who took fans on an emotional, out-of-control ride. Yet behind the violence was a gentle soul. His wife, Colette Foley, who stood by him for over 35 years, saw past the bloodshed. She noticed his kind eyes, his terrible humor, and the man who chose Beauty and the Beast as their wedding song. She understood his commitment, a drive to ensure fans left the arena talking about his performance, even at the severe risk of his own physical safety. Part 2. The Reluctant Arrival. Despite establishing a reputation as a hardcore legend worldwide, Foley was not the polished, corporate image desired by Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. The company was operating in a heavily sanitized, family-friendly era. Foley, with his brutal style, simply did not fit the mold. McMahon, according to backstage accounts, did not find him marketable or attractive. It was Jim Ross, then the vice president of talent relations, who championed Foley's cause. The WWF needed a compelling, unpredictable dancing partner for one of its greatest attractions, The Undertaker. McMahon had been feeding giants to the dead man, a formula that had grown stale and dull. Ross knew they needed a lunatic. Reluctantly, McMahon agreed to hire Foley, but with a strict condition. His face had to be covered. He was repackaged as Mankind, a tortured, masked intellectual who pulled out his own hair, in the hands of an ordinary performer. This gimmick would have been a catastrophic failure. But Foley injected his absolute soul into the character. His commitment was absolute. As veteran producer Jerry Briscoe noted, Foley would not turn down anything but the bed covers. The strategy worked. Mankind and The Undertaker engaged in a brutal, globe-trotting rivalry spanning 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television main events. But as the summer of 1998 approached, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He needed a moment that would cement his legacy, not detract from it. Part 3. Designing the Descent. The concept of Hell in a Cell was relatively new. It had debuted just 9 months prior in a masterpiece between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. Traditional steel cage matches ended when a competitor escaped. Foley pitched a different idea to McMahon, a cage with a roof where 2 men enter and only 1 leaves. When it was decided that Mankind and The Undertaker would step into this demonic structure, Foley found himself paralyzed by the pressure. The inaugural cell match was a technical marvel. Foley knew he lacked the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels. To compensate, he sought the counsel of Terry Funk. During a brainstorming session, Funk jokingly suggested that they start the match on top of the cage, and that Foley should get thrown off. What started as a dark just planted a seed in Foley's mind. He pitched the idea to McMahon and The Undertaker. Initially met with resistance, Foley's persuasive conviction eventually won them over. He assured them he had been on top of the cell before and was comfortable with the height. That was a lie. Foley was terrified of heights. Part 4. The Flight of Mankind. When the lights went down at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, a sold-out crowd of 16,000 people had no idea they were about to witness a defining moment in television history. As the menacing music of Mankind played, he did not enter the cage door. He began to climb. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted instantly from routine production to bewildered anxiety. Jimmy Corderas, a referee stationed at the monitor bank alongside Jerry Briscoe, recalled the sheer shock among the crew. No one expected a match to start 20 feet in the air. When The Undertaker followed him up, the reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. 600 pounds of humanity now stood on a flimsy mesh roof secured only by zip ties. With every step, the metal sank by nearly a foot. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. The structure was failing. Foley attempted a maneuver near the edge. The Undertaker, realizing the center of the roof was giving way, blocked it. They moved toward the precipice. Below them lay a drastically small Spanish announce table, looking less like a safety net and more like a fragile dollhouse prop. Then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and hurled his 300-pound body off the top of the cage. To those watching, time both froze and accelerated. Foley plummeted almost 20 feet, violently crashing through the announce table. Spanish commentator Hugo Savanovic barely escaped being crushed. The sound of the impact was horrifying. Backstage, the locker room erupted in sheer panic. Colleagues genuinely believed they had just witnessed a fatal accident. This was an era where the lines of reality were tightly guarded, but in that moment, the curtain was violently ripped away. A man was lying motionless amidst splintered wood and twisted metal. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, rushed the chaotic scene. Paramedics brought out a gurney. The match, by all logical and medical standards, was over. Foley was loaded onto the stretcher. The crowd stood in stunned silence. But as the gurney moved down the aisle, a terrifying realization washed over Foley. He knew that returning to the match would immortalize him. Against the frantic pleas of officials, doctors, and his peers, Foley rolled off the stretcher. Smiling a blood-stained macabre grin, he began the agonizing climb back up the cell. Part 5. The Unplanned Catastrophe. What followed was not part of the script. It was a terrifying accident that nearly cost Mick Foley his life. The plan was for The Undertaker to execute a chokeslam, a maneuver where he grabs his opponent by the throat and slams him into the mat on the roof of the cage. The intention was for the mesh to safely sag. Instead, the roof gave way entirely. Foley plummeted through the steel, free-falling to the solid, unyielding ring canvas below. He hit the mat with the force of a 25-mile-per-hour car crash. But the nightmare did not end with the impact. A heavy, solid steel folding chair that had been on the roof followed him down. striking him directly in the face upon his landing. Backstage, the panic turned to dread. This was a completely different scenario from the first fall. Foley lay lifeless, knocked unconscious for 42 agonizing seconds. The Undertaker, peering down through the gaping hole in the roof, instructed Terry Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the extent of the devastation was gruesome. His jaw was dislocated. He had a severe wound beneath his lip, and in a bizarre, horrifying visual that would define his career, one of his front teeth had been knocked out by the steel chair, lodged into his throat, and blown out through his nasal passage, where it sat visibly resting in his nostril. By any modern standard, the match should have been stopped. But in that era, matches were rarely halted. Time was simply bought. As Foley stood up, battered and concussed, the crowd witnessed a man transcending the bounds of physical endurance. In a final act of grotesque theatricality, Foley signaled for thumbtacks to be spread across the ring. He allowed himself to be slammed back first into thousands of the sharp pins, ensuring his body absorbed maximum punishment before The Undertaker finally secured a victory in the 17-minute match. Part 6. The Price of Immortality. The immediate aftermath was a chaotic blend of adulation and medical emergency. Foley waved off the stretcher once more, walking the back under his own power to a thunderous, legendary ovation. Behind the curtain, Vince McMahon met him with profound gratitude, but delivered a stern warning. Never attempt anything like that again. Dr. Petit plucked thumbtacks from Foley's flesh while assessing a horrifying list of injuries. A bruised kidney that would plague him for 6 weeks, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, 15 facial stitches, and the loss of 2 teeth. The concussion, severe as it was, barely registered in the medical protocols of time. The toll extended far beyond Foley's battered body. For Colette Foley, the night was a waking nightmare. Without the customary post-match phone call to confirm his safety, she was left to wonder if her husband had survived. When he finally called hours later, her relief was instantly swallowed by deep, furious anger. Her children believed their father was dead. The implicit trust she held, that he would not jeopardize their family for a performance, was shattered. Yet, professionally, the gamble paid off. The match fundamentally altered the trajectory of Foley's career. 6 months later, the man Vince McMahon, once deemed unmarketable, was crowned a world champion. However, the bar had been permanently raised. Foley felt a crushing obligation to live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. He continued to chase the roar of the crowd, taking risks that continually pushed the boundaries of human safety. Just 7 months after Hell in a Cell, Foley engaged in an I Quit match against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The bout devolved into a sickening display of unprotected head trauma. The original plan called for Foley to take 5 strikes to the head with a steel chair while handcuffed. In the heat of the moment, the script dissolved. Foley absorbed 11 unprotected shots to the skull. The collateral damage of that night was profound. His young children watched the brutal spectacle from the front row, traumatized by the sight of their father being beaten to a pulp. His daughter, Noelle, admits she holds no singular memory of her father ever wrestling, likely due to the intense psychological trauma of witnessing those events. The brain damage sustained for the sake of a television angle was, in the words of those closest to him, sickening. Part 7. The Echoes of the Fall. Today, the legacy of Mick Foley is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy. The physical bill for his 15 minutes in the spotlight has come due. Medical science now understands the devastating long-term effects of repetitive brain trauma, specifically chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. Foley has faced periods where he could not remember how to drive home. Independent neurologists have explicitly warned him of the severe consequences if he ever stepped into a ring again. He lives with the profound daily reality of his choices. He engages in mental gymnastics, performing spoken word shows to keep his mind sharp, continually seeking the stimulation and acceptance of a live audience. Colette encourages him to enjoy his life, but constantly reminds him not to push his luck. For years, Foley harbored deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match. It cast a massive shadow over his entire career, reducing his multifaceted legacy to 2 terrifying falls. He felt he had accomplished nothing else. But a conversation with The Undertaker shifted his perspective. The dead man reminded him that what they created that night would outlive them both. In a poignant moment captured years later at a company warehouse, Foley came face to face with the original cell structure. Touching the cold, rusted steel, the legendary brawler broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of the danger, the fear, and the sheer luck that he was still alive to tell the tale. Mick Foley traded his body for the roar of the crowd. He transformed a deep-seated need for love and acceptance into a canvas for surreal, sublime, and highly dangerous performance art. There were moments of terrifying darkness, but there was also an undeniable magic in his ability to leave the world in complete awe. Was it worth the pain? Was it worth the trauma? Those are questions only Mick Foley can truly answer, but the evidence remains immortalized on film. A dangerously crazy masterpiece that continues to serve as both the ultimate testament to the human spirit and the darkest cautionary tale in the history of professional wrestling. Voiceover. For the dark side of the ring, this is a story of a man who fell from the heavens, survived a descent into hell, and somehow walked away to tell us about the view. The Devil's Canvas, the anatomy of hell in a cell, the gateway to the extreme. On June 28, 1998, the landscape of professional wrestling was forever altered inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. A structure of unforgiving steel descended upon the ring for the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event. It was a match that would immediately earn its place as one of the most shocking, terrifying, and defining spectacles in the history of sports entertainment. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The match was Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell hits the consciousness like a heavy mallet. Viewers and industry insiders alike knew the concept was going to be inherently dangerous. But absolutely no one could have predicted the sheer magnitude of the chaos that was about to unfold. On that night, 2 unique talents stepped onto the grand stage. 2 men who had built their careers on pushing the envelope until it teetered precariously over the edge. Professional wrestling is often dismissed by critics as a stage performance. But as the events of that evening proved, you simply cannot fake gravity. Many veterans of the industry have confessed being frightened by various stunts over the years. But nothing instilled as much pure terror as this match. What left the fans in the locker room completely stunned was the unrelenting, incomprehensible punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, willingly endured until you witnessed it with your own eyes. You could not truly believe that a human being could physically absorb such trauma and survive. This match was vividly real. The pain was real. The drama was profoundly real. Backstage, peers and producers were cursing, screaming, and questioning the sanity of the man putting his life on the line. Why go to such extremes? Today, the legacy of this infamous Hell in a Cell match persists as both an epic success of storytelling and a dark cautionary tale about the human cost of entertainment. We dodged several bullets that day. The collateral damage that followed asked a chilling question. When is it enough? You pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but as we look back, all of us need to ask ourselves a difficult question. Was it truly worth it? The psychology of a hardcore legend. To understand the madness of Hell in a Cell, one must first analyze the psychology of Mick Foley. Everyone who steps into a professional wrestling ring is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, a childhood marred by being constantly teased created an overwhelming, almost desperate need to be liked and accepted. He wanted the championship, but more importantly, he wanted the reaction of the crowd. According to Foley's own recollections, the genesis of his extreme style began during his sophomore year of college. In a desperate bid for attention, he took a swig of red food coloring and performed a high-flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor as he spat out the fake blood concoction. A female student screamed that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment of revulsion, Mick Foley felt an undeniable surge of power. He realized that if he could not make people naturally love him, perhaps he could captivate them by disgusting them. He needed reactions, and he was willing to sacrifice his own body to get them. Mick Foley eventually became universally recognized as the hardcore legend. He survived Hell in a Cell, and that match is often cited as the perfect gateway for new fans. However, the sheer brutality of that bout sets a nearly impossible standard. A typical Mick Foley match was a grueling exhibition of hardcore violence, featuring blood, thumbtacks, fire, and barbed wire. He was a man who had been exploded by chemical explosives in Japan, speared through flaming tables, and slammed directly onto solid concrete. Those closest to him, including his daughter Noelle, acknowledged that he simply loved generating a visceral response from the audience. Realism was his primary tool. Foley genuinely believed he was not having a successful match unless he had physical trouble walking back to his hotel room. It was not that he enjoyed the pain itself. Rather, he found immense satisfaction in his ability to absorb it and sell the drama to the audience. His wife, Colette, who has known him for over 35 years, saw the duality of the man. She saw a gentle, kind person with terrible humor who chose Beauty and the Beast as their wedding song. Yet, she also understood his deep commitment to his craft. When the adrenaline pumped, his singular drive was to ensure the fans left talking about how great the show was, completely at his own risk. The journey to the World Wrestling Federation. Mick Foley's path to superstardom was anything but conventional. He developed an unpredictable persona known as Cactus Jack, a charismatic, seemingly insane brawler who commanded attention. Jim Cornette, an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, noted that Foley was a master of ring psychology. Foley understood that fans were inherently drawn to performers who appeared completely out of control, biting opponents, and seemingly going completely off the script. Before reaching the grand stages of American television, Foley honed his craft in Japan. Living humbly with a mattress on the floor and a broken television, he would study Japanese wrestling tapes for 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism and the storytelling where a wrestler had to defeat not just their opponent, but their harsh surroundings. In Japan, he found a mentor in Terry Funk, an absolute master at making audiences suspend their disbelief. Together, they engage in explosive, fiery death matches that established Foley's reputation. He thrived on the wild, visceral elements of combat, viewing the scars as proof that he had created something truly special. Despite this global success, Foley never envisioned himself in the World Wrestling Federation. The company was in a family-friendly era, presenting a polished, clean product that directly contradicted Foley's gritty style. Furthermore, the company's chairman, Vince McMahon, initially had absolutely no interest in hiring him. McMahon did not believe Foley was marketable or attractive enough for television. It was Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, who convinced McMahon to take a chance. Ross needed compelling opponents for The Undertaker, who was arguably the biggest star in the history of the industry. While McMahon favored matching The Undertaker with giant athletes, a formula Ross found increasingly. Though, Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. McMahon finally relented, but with a strict condition. He would hire Foley, but they had completely covered his face. McMahon viewed Foley as a nobody, leading to the creation of the Mankind character. Gerald Briscoe, a legendary producer, recalled the monumental challenge of building a compelling persona out of deliberate obscurity. Yet, this bizarre concept succeeded solely because of Mick Foley's unmatched dedication. He committed his body and soul to character, forging a profound connection with the audience through sheer sacrifice. The conception of the Cell. Mankind and The Undertaker built a legendary rivalry, battling across the globe in 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television matches. However, Foley felt his character had reached a plateau. He desperately needed a catalyst to elevate his legacy rather than detract from it. As the King of the Ring event approached, producers planned to reignite the feud using a recently developed match concept. Traditional cage matches in the World Wrestling Federation require competitors to escape over the top or through a door. It was Foley who originally suggested putting a roof on the cage to ensure that both men would go in, but only one would walk out. Thus, Hell in a Cell was born. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker had been a masterclass in storytelling and athleticism, setting an incredibly high bar. Foley watched that first bout in awe, knowing he possessed none of the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels. 9 months later, burdened with the pressure of following a masterpiece, Foley consulted his mentor, Terry Funk. In a moment of dark humor, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match on top of the cell structure and that Foley should be thrown off. While Funk laughed, Foley fell completely silent. He looked at his mentor and realized that he could actually execute that horrifying idea. The concept took root in his mind and refused to let go. He pitched the idea to Vince McMahon and The Undertaker, portraying it as a casual, manageable stunt. The Undertaker was initially highly skeptical of throwing a man off a steel roof, but Foley's determination eventually won them over. Foley approached this match not as the dawn of a new era in his career, but simply as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed that when this particular run ended, his wrestling career would be over as well. The plunge from the heavens. When the Hell in a Cell structure lowered at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, a sold-out crowd of 16,000 fans watched in anticipation. Jimmy Corderas, a referee and ring crew member, watched in the production area alongside Gerald Briscoe, fully aware that history was about to be written. As Mankind's music hit, he completely shattered expectations. Instead of entering the locked door, he immediately began scaling the outside of the massive steel structure. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, calling the action at ringside, were just as confused as the fans at home. Foley had confidently assured management that he was comfortable with heights, but in reality, as he reached the top, he was absolutely terrified. The lights glared, the arena stretched into darkness, and as The Undertaker's ominous music echoed, Foley silently wondered how he could climb back down without ruining a professional reputation. The match officially commenced 16 feet in the air. The danger escalated immediately. The roof of the cell was secured only by plastic zip ties, under the combined weight of nearly 600 pounds. The mesh flooring gave way with every single step. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena like gunfire. Foley attempted to execute a maneuver on the unstable steel, but The Undertaker wisely stopped him, recognizing the very real threat that the entire roof could collapse. They brawled toward the edge of the structure, directly above the commentary tables. Backstage personnel assumed they would tease the edge before moving back to the center. There was absolutely no margin for error. The tables below looked incredibly small from that towering vantage point. Then, the unthinkable happened. A 300-pound man was violently flung from the top of the cage, plummeting nearly 20 feet through the air. Time seemed to drastically slow down, yet it was over in the blink of an eye. The sickening crash of Mick Foley destroying the Spanish commentary table shook the very foundation of the arena. Backstage, the locker room erupted in absolute panic. It was completely synonymous with witnessing a fatal automobile accident. The collective thought among the performers and producers was chillingly unanimous. Mick Foley is dead. At ringside, announcer Hugo Savanovic narrowly escaped being crushed. The silence in the arena was deafening, followed by audible gasps of horror. Colette Foley, watching at home with their young children, desperately tried to soothe them by insisting it was fake, while her own mind spiraled into absolute terror. The physical reality of the fall was staggering. If The Undertaker had thrown him just an inch too far or too short, Foley would have violently impacted the exposed concrete floor. Miraculously, Foley possessed the spatial awareness to rotate his body in mid-air, landing flat on his back to maximize the cushion of the flimsy wooden table. Medical personnel, including Dr. Francois Petit, a martial arts expert and trusted medical professional for the locker room, rushed to the wreckage. Terry Funk was the first to reach Foley, frantically checking if his friend was still breathing. The situation was chaotic. The emergency gurney could not fit through the narrow ringside path, forcing officials to dramatically raise the enormous steel cell while the Undertaker remained standing on top of it. Foley was strapped to the stretcher. Everyone, from the fans to the executive producers, believed the match was unequivocally over, but Mick Foley was not finished. The unforgiving concrete. As Foley was being wheeled up the entrance aisle, he realized that the longer he remained on camera, the more captivated the audience became. Defying all medical logic and the desperate pleas from officials to stop, Foley climbed off the stretcher. Driven by adrenaline and a twisted sense of obligation, he began his ascent back up the cell. Backstage, respect morphed into total disbelief. How could a man survive such a fall and willfully return for more? But Foley was determined to complete the story. The next planned sequence was supposed to be relatively safe. A choke slam on the roof that would cause the steel mesh to gradually sag, creating a dramatic visual. Reality, however, is a cruel director. When the Undertaker lifted Foley and slammed him into chain link, the damaged zip ties completely surrendered. The roof violently tore open. Foley plummeted completely through the top of the cage, free falling to the solid ring mat below. This was not scripted. This was an absolute disaster. Backstage, the panic was immediate and absolute. The ring mat is essentially a thin layer of padding over tightly pulled canvas and rigid wooden boards. Hitting it from that height is exactly like crashing onto solid cement. To make matters even worse, a heavy steel folding chair, which had been resting on the roof, fell through the opening directly behind Foley, violently striking him in the face as he hit the mat. He lay entirely motionless. The concern was no longer about a wrestling match. It was about preserving a human life. Colette Foley watched in furious horror, feeling betrayed because she had not been warned about a second fall, completely unaware that neither had her husband. Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Officials flooded the cage once again. The Undertaker looked down from the broken roof at Terry Funk and commanded him to check if Foley was still alive. Funk relayed that he was still breathing. For 42 agonizing seconds, Mick Foley's mind went entirely blank, recognizing the desperate need to buy time. Terry Funk engaged in a spontaneous physical altercation with the Undertaker, diverting the attention of the audience and the cameras. In any standard athletic commission environment, the match would have been immediately stopped. But in that era of professional wrestling, matches were not stopped. Time was simply bought. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. The realization dawned on him that he was still in the middle of the match. Running entirely on instinct and adrenaline, he somehow managed to stand up. His face was a horrific, bloody mess. In a macabre display of showmanship, Foley realized he had a massive hole underneath his lower lip. He deliberately pushed his tongue through the wound to create a haunting visual for the television cameras. As he smiled, the world noticed a tooth lodged inside his nostril. Knocked out by the falling chair and inhaled through his nasal passage as he desperately gasped for air. The match continued into its final, agonizing act. Foley, still heavily concussed, signaled for the introduction of thumbtacks. He was slammed violently onto thousands of the sharp metal pins, purposely rolling around to ensure they stuck into his flesh. The adrenaline had completely overridden his central nervous system. He had become an active participant in his own pain. After 17 excruciating minutes, The Undertaker finally secured a victory. The 16,000 fans in attendance had witnessed an absolute spectacle of human endurance. When the medical team brought the stretcher out for a second time, Foley stubbornly waved it off, sparking a roar of appreciation that shook the rafters. He understood that risking his own physical well-being allowed the audience to deeply, truly believe in him. The aftermath and the I Quit match. Behind the curtain, Vince McMahon met Foley with a mixture of profound gratitude and absolute dread. While medical staff began the painful process of plucking thumbtacks from Foley's skin, McMahon thanked him for what he had done for the company, but strictly demanded that Foley promise never to do anything like it again. Foley was so disoriented that he had to ask The Undertaker if they had actually performed the thumbtack sequence. The physical toll was devastating. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, missing teeth, and required 15 stitches below his lip. The medical evaluation for a severe concussion was practically an afterthought in those days. Yet, from a professional standpoint, Hell in a Cell was a monumental triumph. It completely changed the industry perception of Mick Foley. Within 6 months, the man Vince McMahon once deemed unmarketable was crowned the World Wrestling Federation champion. However, the bar for violence had been set to an incredibly dangerous height. Foley felt immense pressure to consistently live up to the moniker of the hardcore legend. He felt he owed the fans an unprecedented spectacle every time he performed. Management warned him that continuing the style would ultimately catch up with him, but Foley pushed forward. Just 7 months later, Foley engaged in an infamous I Quit match against Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. This bout featured a stipulation where the match would not be stopped for excessive blood loss. Despite warnings from producers that it was a terrible idea, Foley structured the climax around taking unprotected chair shots to the head while his hands were handcuffed behind his back. He had originally instructed his opponent to hit him 5 times. In the chaos of the live performance, he absorbed 11 catastrophic blows to the skull. Colette Foley and their young children were present in the arena. The children were deeply traumatized, unable to distinguish between the scripted narrative and the very real brain damage their father was sustaining on national television. Noelle Foley later reflected on the sickening reality that a normal person could have easily died from absorbing 11 direct headshots with a steel chair. The echoes of the cell, the consequences of Foley's dedication, are profound and permanent. He understood that his chosen style would result in great discomfort, deliberately choosing to make maneuvers more painful if he believed it would look better for the audience. Doctors aggressively advised him to stop wrestling, warning him of crippling physical deterioration, but the allure of the performance kept drawing him back. Today, the long-term effect of multiple concussions cast a dark shadow over his legacy. Foley has experienced severe memory loss, sometimes driving around completely unable to remember where he lives. An independent urologist delivered a grim verdict. He should never step into a wrestling ring again. The fear of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a terrifying degenerative brain disease caused by repetitive trauma, looms heavily over his family. Every single bump taken in the ring is likened to experiencing a 25-mile-per-hour car crash, and Foley took thousands of them. Foley relies on spoken word shows and performing arts to exercise his mind, attempting to stay sharp as he ages. He chooses to appreciate what he accomplished rather than live in absolute fear of the unknown. For years, he harbored deep resentment toward Hell in a Cell, frustrated that his entire, multifaceted career was reduced to one singular, incredibly dangerous night. It was The Undertaker who helped him find peace, wisely noting that what they accomplished that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. Mick Foley offered the world a canvas of surreal, sublime performance art, painted with his own blood and sacrifice. When he recently visited the company warehouse and unexpectedly laid hands on the original cell, the legendary tough guy broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of what he had survived. There is no monetary reward significant enough to truly cover the horrific risks he took. With modern medical knowledge regarding head trauma, one can only wonder if history would have been written differently. Yet, Mick Foley succeeded in his ultimate goal. He earned the thunderous roar of the crowd. He captured the undisputed awe of millions. He survived the Devil's Playground, cementing a legacy that will echo through the annals of sports entertainment until the end of time. The Shadow of the Cell, a legacy forged in steel. Introduction. The night reality broke through the canvas. On June 28, 1998, The professional wrestling landscape was forever altered. The event was the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view, held inside the packed Pittsburgh Civic Arena. That night, an audience of 16,000 people eagerly awaited a spectacle that would ultimately earn its place as one of the most shocking encounters in sports entertainment history. The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. Hell in a Cell is a concept that hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. As an observer of this industry for decades, I knew the premise was going to be intense. But no one could have anticipated the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. We had two talents out there who liked to push the envelope until it tumbled over the edge. There is a common refrain among critics that professional wrestling is merely an illusion, but you cannot fake gravity. Throughout my career, I have been frightened by many things inside the squared circle, yet nothing frightened me quite as much as the events of that evening. What left fans absolutely stunned was the unrelenting physical toll Mick Foley endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically sustain such impact and live to tell the tale. This match was real. The pain was real. The drama was real. For those of us watching, we were screaming, cursing, and questioning the very sanity of the performer. Why do this? Today, this infamous match persists as both an epic success and a stark cautionary tale. The collateral damage that ensued forces us to look deeply at the industry and ask, when does it stop? When is enough? As we pull back the curtain, we must examine the dangerously chaotic masterpiece that unfolded, and we all must ask ourselves the ultimate question. Was it worth the price? Part 1. The psychology of a hardcore legend. To understand the madness of Hell in a Cell, one must first understand the mind of Mick Foley. According to those who know the industry best, everyone who steps into a wrestling ring is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Foley, a childhood filled with being teased birthed an overwhelming, deeply rooted need to be liked and to capture the ultimate prize, the World Wrestling Federation Championship. As recounted by Foley himself, the blueprint for his extreme career began in his college years. He recalled a moment as a sophomore when he took a swig of red food coloring and executed a leaping dive off a bed, landing on a stuffed animal resting on a concrete floor. When he hit the ground and spit out the blood-like concoction, the dormitory crowd was watching. Hearing someone yell out in absolute disgust gave him a profound sense of power. It was a pivotal realization.